An innumerable crowd gathered at the gates of the demonic Union Murim, also called the Palace of Demons. Everyone and even their eyes alone were struck by the number of souls gathered, tearing inside as if pulled by force. Such a crowd no longer seemed strange. The palace accepted everyone without exception, regardless of which factions or sects they belonged to. Any mortal with even a spark of potential could be taught forbidden demonic arts. Obviously, no sensible person would want to miss the chance to rise above others. Among all this ascending crowd, many eyes caught a young man in snow-white robes. He clearly stood out against the motley crowd, so some immediately assumed, surely someone had already departed to the other world. The old man's companion found such notions too strange. Competitions in 10 demonic palaces and they hadn't even started yet. How could someone die prematurely? But the elderly man quickly understood everything. This boy was a young embalmer preparing the deceased for their final journey. And the young lad was now intently gazing at the majestic walls of the demonic clan, towering ahead like a true fortress. Under the sunlight, his eyes flashed crimson light as soon as the youth remembered his dear grandfather and vowed to carry the begun task to the very end no matter what. The boy's name was Bu Yun Sol, a name given to him by his beloved grandfather after he found the infant abandoned in a field amid the snowy wasteland. Thanks to the old man's guidance, the boy mastered the art of embalming dead bodies. But life for them was far from simple because of the cursed profession. People often hated them both, turned away, and shunned them like lepers. This did not bother or upset the boy in the slightest. He learned rapidly, absorbing knowledge, and by the bodies alone, he could unerringly determine what the deceased had done in life. By the gait and well-developed leg muscles, it was easy to conclude the deceased had honed his swordsmanship for years. Thus, the dead man was a skilled fencer who had walked the path of the sword. The grandfather always praised the boy for his sharp, insightful gaze, for the heavens themselves had given the grandson a rare gift to see what is hidden from the eyes of ordinary mortals. No matter what harsh trials befell Bu and Sol, the grandfather always stayed close, protecting and guiding him. It went on until that fateful day came, which turned the boy's whole life upside down. Late at night, the old man suddenly opened his eyes in their patched-up hut that was falling apart from the sharp creak of the open windows. In the yard it went mad, the winds tore in gusts, and the bamboo in the grove creaked eerily under the blows of the storm. Peering into the impenetrable darkness, the old man immediately realized, unfriendly people, thirsty for blood, were prowling here. Good people do not come so secretly at night. So he lunged forward, shook the boy by the shoulders to make him immediately wake up from sleep. Grandfather, with a forced smile, suggested to his grandson to play an interesting game. He had to portray a dead man as realistically as possible and not give himself away with any movement. Just as solemnly, the old man promised, if the boy excels this time, the grandfather will definitely buy him new clothes and a real sword, the one he had dreamed of for so long. After these words, he carefully laid his grandson in the wooden coffin and began slowly closing the lid. Only at the end did the man with a warm smile ask Bu Yun Sol to try to stretch the game until dawn and not leave earlier. Despite the grandson's surprise and confusion, the old man darted forward and hastily shut the coffin, hiding the boy from prying eyes. Soon after that, he drew his blade, long gathering dust, and having not touched it for many years, resolutely opened the door, stepped out to face danger. Leaping out of the darkness, the stranger mockingly snatched praise from the old man who had hidden from the world for so many long years, like the most despicable rat trembling in its burrow. Only then did the unknown visitor, hiding his face under a hat, call the old man the demonic blade of all 8 branches, a legend about whom bloody tales were told. At first glance, he was an ordinary peaceful embalmer, but in reality, he was the legendary warrior Bu Zhanyang. Obviously, the old man had not heard his real name for a long time, since he had permanently left the position of deputy head of the palace, renouncing his past. However, the newcomer was truly madly enraged that the celebrated warrior had refused a high position to earn a living by such a miserable and despicable craft, so the furious demon fiercely lunged at the old man without wasting a moment. But the man stopped the swift strike with impressive ease, calmly explaining, he took up the work of an embalmer not at all to earn a living. No, he sought to repent for all the sins of the past, atoning for the bloody guilt before the world. In the end, the elder agreed without resistance to give his life to the one who came for his exhausted soul. But in return, he only asked to retreat further from the house. The man, despite his bitter fate, did not want innocent people, those not involved in his sins, to suffer. Eventually, the other agreed to these just conditions. Returning, the demons slowly withdrew and finally ordered the old man did not even dare to think about fleeing in fear and saving his worthless life. And only with the arrival of the long-awaited morning did the boy finally finish his grueling game of the dead and with great effort climbed out of the cramped coffin. He simply could no longer endure the icy cold inside. Although the boy longed for the promised uniform and sword, he was ready to give up. The reward waiting had become unbearable. And it was surprising that the grandfather suddenly disappeared just like that, somewhere into the unknown. It was extremely unusual. He had never run away from their games before. So Bu Yun Sol at first assumed that someone from the clients had ordered the grandfather to prepare the next deceased. After that, the boy sighed bitterly. It turned out that people did not consider them human because they performed the cursed work of embalmers, desecrating dead flesh. However, to great surprise and horror, as soon as the boy stepped into the yard, he immediately saw crimson traces of a recent fierce battle. They had dried right on the ground. As soon as this heartbreaking discovery sounded, the boy felt something bad icy, chilling the blood in his veins. He sprang from his place and ran away as far as his eyes could see, not paying attention to the road. It is unknown how long he ran at full speed before he finally exhausted himself and stopped, gasping heavily. But at the very end of the path, only one thing awaited him: his most beloved grandfather, who was beaten to death by that demonic freak without mercy, without pity. Terrified to death, the boy immediately rushed to the old man, who at that moment was already lying dying without both his hands, cut off in the battle. The boy desperately tried to understand what had happened to his grandfather and how he could possibly help in any way. The elder, with a heavy, barely noticeable smile, apologized for the fact that it was time to leave this world. He asked his grandson not to abandon the embalmer's work even after his inevitable death, to continue the tradition. The man spoke through his last strength, so he began to choke on his own blood. It bubbled in his throat, but despite the painful agony, the grandfather did not fall silent. He begged that his grandson should not even think of avenging him. Revenge would bring sorrow and destruction. Then, for the first time in his short life, Bu Yun Sol felt a true primal horror, like ice settling on his soul. His eyes filled with a bloody light as he swore he would not forgive those bastards who did this to the only dearest person. The boy even intended to follow his grandfather to the realm of the dead, to the other world. The old man kept repeating, "There is no difference between hell and the world of humans. Both are full of suffering." So the boy thought it was better to go to the underworld together with the old man than to remain here alone without a single kindred soul. The old man only smiled heavily and wearily. It seemed to him much easier to accept inevitable death and leave quietly. But the farewell with Bu Yun Sol turned into an extremely painful and exhausting ordeal. And yet the dying man had one last request for his beloved grandson. He wanted the boy to go as far away from here as possible and never return. After that, the old man smiled one last time and confessed to the child. He had been infinitely happy all this time while they stayed together, never parting. As soon as these words escaped his lips, the body immediately weakened, lost strength, and he fell face down into the dirt, giving up his soul. In this terrifying vision, the boy lost all feelings. He became a true living dead, completely without emotions. He knew well the grandfather did not seek revenge. He was simply trying with desperate stubbornness to protect Bu Yun Sol from destruction. He was fiercely torn by pity, because this time he could no longer listen to the grandfather's last will and fulfill the request. Looking at the mutilated body of the man, the youth instantly realized his hands were cut off in a single moment with one mighty stroke. The cutting motion went from top to bottom at a very specific angle. Such a rare technique was seldom seen even among skilled warriors. During the penultimate attack, the killer changed the way of holding the blade to deprive the old man of sight in exactly the same way. Obviously, such a strange and refined sword technique could only be from the demonic path, the forbidden style. Moreover, the one capable of inflicting such terrible wounds has probably studied the deadly technique of Yoga Tianju, the one famous for its cruelty. The man's body looked no less terrible. It bore 93 wounds, inflicted exclusively by hidden weapons. Even the forbidden technique of a sky full of falling flowers cannot leave more than 60 at once. It seemed that these injuries were inflicted by someone completely different. Most likely, an extremely rare technique was Uzudon, capable of delivering at least 100 strikes in a single instant, merging them into one. Then the young man carefully examined the tongue of the deceased old man and saw the lower part of the nails had blackened and swollen. Everything unmistakably pointed to a deadly poisonous venom. It causes the rotting of flesh and blood, corroding the body from within. So the killer was a man from the demonic path, the one who mastered the forbidden yoga technique, had a hidden weapon of the highest caliber, and also used rare poisons that dissolve flesh to nothingness. There were very few such skilled warriors in this vast world. They could be counted on one hand. So Bu Yun-sol was obliged to find this person no matter what, even at the cost of his own life. Recalling this heartbreaking event, the boy himself did not notice how he began to cry uncontrollably right over the papers of the agreement he was clutching in his hands. The warrior guards were surprised by the boy's strange behavior and could not understand why he was crying. And considering his young age, they decided he was simply scared when he saw the waiver agreement for liability for the participant's life and health. So the stern man indulgently advised the boy to get lost if he was afraid to leave his bloody fingerprint on the contract. And when the guard leaned closer, he saw with surprise, despite the tears of sorrow clouding his eyes, the young man cold-bloodedly bit his finger, releasing crimson drops of blood. Without hesitation, he resolutely pressed the fingerprint onto the paper, not a single flinch. After that cursed moment when the grandfather took his last breath, Bu Yun-sol could no longer say anything, and since then his life began to fall apart like a broken mirror. He had nothing left but to take the demonic path of revenge, soaked in blood. So he came to these competitions to begin his long-awaited retribution, no matter what price he would have to pay for it. The battle between two mighty forces, orthodox and unorthodox sects, lasted long, bloody years, never ceasing for a moment. The orthodox sect sought to restore justice and administer judgment, united under the banners of the Murim Alliance. Meanwhile, the unorthodox sects gathered around the sinister demonic palace, worshipping only brute strength and the power of the strongest. For many years, a fragile balance was maintained between these opposing forces. It did not allow one side to destroy the other. But the orthodox sects desired greater power and complete domination. This very desire gave rise to elite posts for 18 great martial arts masters, warriors of light, created for a greater good. With the emergence of a new threat from the Murim Alliance, the demonic palace also decided to enhance its forces, unwilling to fall behind. Thus were chosen the legendary demonic masters, capable of resisting enemies. That is why a tempting offer came to take 10 geniuses to the palace and teach them forbidden martial arts, regardless of origin or previous occupation. Of course, this inspiring news set in motion an innumerable army of youths from all corners of the world, all gathered in one place to achieve the greatest success and glory. Finally, Bu Yun-sol decisively passed through the magnificent main gates and immediately noticed a crowd of people curiously looking at him. Soon they lost interest in the unremarkable boy and turned away, but Bu Yun-sol himself felt a very tangible and terrifying aura of power from some of the contenders. It surged in waves. Surely, among all these gathered people, there was at least one who was somehow connected to the killer of his grandfather, directly or indirectly. What the young man knew for certain: the killer had incredible skill in combat. The boy could not even imagine this in his wildest dreams. To avenge this devil incarnate, Bu Yun-sol himself had to become a true master of martial arts and reach the heights of power. But now, having absolutely nothing behind him, only hatred and determination, becoming one of the 10 demonic masters, this was his only chance to grow stronger and get closer to his goal. Finally, at this solemn moment, a venerable old man stepped onto the platform accompanied by faceless guards with a penetrating gaze. He solemnly introduced himself to those present. His name was Ho Myung-gak, the chief instructor of the palace. He was also known by a fearsome nickname, the Golden Dagger with Bloody Eyes, who instills fear in enemies. Of course, all the gathered youths immediately opened their mouths in sincere admiration. They were given the rare honor to see with their own eyes the legendary figure with the Golden Dagger and Bloody Eyes. Ho Myung-gak angrily laid out the rules clearly. In this sacred place, 10 geniuses will be chosen from the most diverse demonic sects scattered around the world. Those few lucky ones who honorably pass all the prepared trials will become worthy candidates for the place of one of the 10 legendary demonic masters. As the first trial, the martial arts masters of the demonic palace had to carefully test the abilities of the gathered youths, assessing their potential. Of course, no one present could have imagined that the first trial would be so unexpected. Everyone was preparing for a bloody battle, honing their technique. But at that very moment, the stern masters who approached had already begun the examination, methodically probing their bodies as if they were cattle at a fair. In the end, those who passed the selection quickly fell silent. They realized that their physical condition was quite suitable for training. But Bu Yun-sol was seriously worried because his physical abilities were far from the best level. Years of working as an embalmer did not greatly contribute to muscle development. The boy feared that he would be immediately kicked out, not even given a chance to prove himself. But finally, one of the formidable masters approached him and began to feel his fragile body. However, the experienced fighter instantly sensed the youth's physical condition was truly terrible, pitiful. Honestly, the warrior was completely shocked that this weak little boy had even crawled here to enter the deadly competition. But his thirst for victory and iron determination were too noticeable, as if they were streaming from every pore. The master still could not certify a single burning fact enough to simply let the boy pass the selection. So, keeping a stone face, he went on to check other fighters, those who had better chances. The boy himself was not at all surprised by what had happened. Everything he had done in his short life was taking care of lifeless corpses and preparing them for burial. Therefore, such a physical test was clearly beyond his strength, and this was obvious. However, the boy sincerely believed this was by no means the end of his thorny path to revenge. The first brutal selection had just ended when the first dissatisfied immediately burst out. Outrage was flaring up fully. One young spearman fiercely declared they were promised fair competitions, but instead only a primitive test of physical endurance was arranged. Obviously, the warrior perceived this as blatant injustice, and the golden dagger smiled contemptuously in response. Ho Myung-hak patiently explained to the spearman, when it comes to mastering martial arts, bones and muscles are the most important detail, the foundation of strength. This trial was meant to mercilessly weed out weaklings who could not be taught forbidden arts. Yet this boy dares to outrage so boldly, without even passing the simplest basic check. But what angered Ho Myung-hak the most was something else. The spearman named Hek Ren-yoon was firmly convinced that all contenders have the sacred right at least to get a chance to fight and prove that they are worth something. In the end, the instructor fully felt Hek Ren's anger. Its onset pressed him to the ground with an invisible force, like a worthless insect under a boot. Above him rose the legendary golden dagger and grimly promised, in the second trial, those who can learn martial arts even without a worthy, strong body will be determined. The second trial, like the first, was to take place today without any delays. From this moment, all the students were granted the right to start fighting each other without any mercy. The main condition is simple. The trial will be considered complete only when among the survivors there remains only one, the last one standing. Of course, all the boys were shocked and stunned. They were forced to mercilessly kill each other, even though formally they were on the same side and served the demons. And the spearman Hek Ren-yoon gripped his spear tighter, filled with iron determination. He knew perfectly well if he was destined to kill, he would target the weakest opponents and start the bloody fight first, not giving them a chance to recover. At first, the warrior rushed at Bu Yun-sol, obviously considering him the weakest among all the contenders. And this was not surprising. He looked slender and had no muscles at all. So the spearman fiercely spun his deadly spear in the air, then threw it at the boy like lightning. But in a moment it became clear this spear was actually intended for a completely different person, the one standing nearby. The weapon hit the young warrior right in the stomach and pierced through. The spearman smiled joyfully, anticipating the moment when he could finally kill the first victim and begin his ascent. The poor guy only wheezed pitifully, convulsively clutching the spear shaft and trying to pull it out of his body, from which blood was flowing profusely. But in the end, nothing worked. Strength rapidly left the dying man, so the first fallen helplessly collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely with scarlet blood that quickly spread into a puddle. Bu Yun-sol harshly and quickly realized why the young man died so suddenly, not lasting even a minute. The archer managed to aim precisely between his ribs, then with one precise strike clearly pierced his heart. After this, the killer, who was wickedly laughing, suggested to the other cowards to attack him altogether, saying that then they would die just as quickly and miserably as that idiot who boldly dared to interfere with him. Watching the brazen antics of Hek Ren-yoon, the golden dagger understood. This guy decided to take the initiative and intimidate others. But in reality, everything turned out to be completely senseless and foolish. The old man generally expected that among those gathered there would be plenty of worthless riffraff unworthy of training. Obviously, the other masters fully agreed with Ho Myung-gak because such behavior in this situation showed how dangerous you are. It was the same as painting a huge target on your own back and luring enemies. Yet his brazen outburst made the rest of the frightened youths stir. They sprang from their places. Everyone immediately started making noise, panicked, and did not know how best to act, because if everything continued in this spirit, a real bloody massacre without any rules would begin. Eventually, one of the boys, mortally afraid that he might be killed first, suddenly betrayed his comrades and rushed at the one standing nearby. But he was suddenly stabbed by another enemy, who stealthily crept up behind him, taking advantage of the confusion. In the end, the arena was choking with true despair and furious slaughter. It engulfed everyone. Ho Myung-gak, cold-bloodedly observing all this, perfectly understood. The less these kids are accustomed to the sight of death, the easier the fear of death paralyses their minds and deprives them of the ability to think clearly. But suddenly he noticed on the bloodied arena several rather interesting specimens. They strikingly stood out from the crowd. Nearby, the master responsible for checking the physical abilities of the candidates also looked at them intently. And among all this bloody slaughter, the two amazing specimens turned out to be two boys. They calmly stood aside and watched what was happening, as if it did not concern them at all. Bu Yoon-sol did nothing. He perfectly understood that these kids were just fools who did not know how to think. They were so afraid of death that they practically shut off their brains and acted purely instinctively. But the golden dagger with bloody eyes clearly proclaimed, "The trial will end only when one survives." The point was not in senseless killings but in surviving at any cost. And yes, if only to calm down a bit and not lose one's head, this quest could be completed much easier by controlling one's strength. Exactly so, the boy, following the instruction for the sake of his late grandfather's good, solemnly promised he would definitely survive this crazy slaughter no matter what it cost. And at that moment, one of the participants stood out especially on the battlefield. He skillfully wielded maces on long chains. But as soon as he dealt with another unlucky opponent, he immediately noticed a strange young man who was pitifully sneaking among piles of corpses, as if trying to hide among the dead bodies and avoid a fight. But Bu Yoon-sol was not hiding at all. He calmly and methodically examined the wounds on the bodies of the fallen, trying to find out from which technique they died. This could save his life. And now the nimble fighter who sneaked up decided to kill this confident boy to remain the last one who survives in this bloody massacre. But the boy managed at the last moment to dodge the deadly blow. Only he surprisingly quickly forgot about the wooden box on his back, so after a direct hit by the mace, the box shattered lengthwise and crosswise, scattering into tiny fragments that immediately fell to the ground. Noticing what was inside the box, the attacker only contemptuously mocked Bu Yoon-sol, saying he was a pathetic seller of funeral supplies, worthless, unworthy even of attention. The boy himself quickly sat down on the ground to gather his precious things scattered everywhere. These things were incredibly dear to his heart. He found them after saying goodbye to his grandfather and returning to the empty house. This was the very form he so madly longed to obtain, and also the beautiful blade promised by his grandfather. In the note enclosed with the gift, the man congratulated his beloved grandson on his birthday one last time and wished him happiness. Now the crazy boy greedily rummaged his gaze over his blade, ready to dip it in the blood of enemies to take revenge. On Bu Yoon-sol's face blazed rage and determination, and the opponent immediately grimly swung his deadly mace to attack and finish off the insolent one. He perfectly understood. The boy would achieve nothing. How could one fight with such a weak short sword against a long weapon? And at that very moment, the second surviving contender arrived suddenly. He struck the insolent one with his swift blade. As soon as this happened, the stranger addressed Bu Yoon-sol, thanked him for so accurately distracting the senseless opponents, giving the opportunity to attack from behind. But Bu Yoon-sol did not even raise an eyebrow. He silently and attentively examined the things brought from home. So the savior quickly concluded, although the boy was lively, agile, and combative, he had never learned martial arts in his life. It was evident at first glance. The warrior with the scar perfectly understood. If he just gathered himself, he could easily kill Bu Yoon-sol with one strike. But he did not have time. The next enemy was already sneaking up from behind, and he had to urgently deal with him, repelling the attack. At that moment, Ho Myung-gak, without taking his eyes off the boy with the scar on his face, recognized his blade. The golden dagger wanted to find out who this mysterious young man was, since he had inherited from the once most unparalleled warrior of the past. The assistant immediately hurried to introduce the young man. His name was Nin Yun Gan, and according to rumors, he found the instructions and sword left by the legendary master deep in the mountains in a forgotten cave. Obviously, because the guy was self-taught, his techniques still limped and were full of annoying gaps and unfinished work. But now he could literally be considered the unofficial student of the great master of the past, the very one who absorbed the knowledge. Although his base was weak, he was quite suitable to take the place of one of the 10 demonic masters, so even now, in this brutal trial, he could defeat all the other contenders. The Golden Dagger considered it a huge, unforgivable gap to give such a legendary sword and martial art to novices like Nin Ungan. At least it was comforting that among those undergoing the trial, he was the strongest at the moment. But the master rightly noted, there were still people left in the arena capable of hiding great and incredible surprises without revealing their true strength. Bai Yun Sol, while Nin Ungan was distracted by another fight, methodically examined the corpses of the fallen. A chopped wound on one of them was rough and uneven, revealing the killer's inexperience. While the protagonist studied various wounds and analyzed the enemy's techniques, Nin Ungan had already dealt with all who remained. He crushed them. In general, he expected that Bu Yun Sol would remain the last opponent and that they would meet exactly like this, in a final one-on-one duel. Nin Ungan perfectly understood. If he killed this strange boy, he would immediately become a candidate for the place of one of the 10 demonic masters and achieve his goal. So the warrior, beckoning the protagonist with his finger, ordered, "Attack first and show your pathetic skills." The protagonist was equally aware. This opponent was the strongest of all the guys standing on the bloodied arena on this fateful day. But while the boy remained calm and watched the fight from the side, he had already managed to see all its weaknesses and flaws in technique. Eventually, Bu Yun Sol, with his short blade, slowly approached the enemy, preparing for the clash. It was visible Nin Ungan froze in anticipation to see what this mysterious boy was capable of. Finally, the fighter plunged into the attack, using the sword technique he had learned from the recordings of the legendary master in the cave. All that remained for the protagonist was to awkwardly deflect deadly strikes, so new wounds appeared on his battered body. To an uninformed viewer, it might have seemed Bu Yun Sol was panicking and unable to control himself, senselessly exposing himself to blow after blow. But the Golden Dagger noticed something interesting as soon as the boy finished each strike. He barely shifted aside, as if dissecting the opponent's technique into small details. Eventually, this boy somehow cleverly avoided deadly wounds each time at the last moment he dodged, and the blade passed by. So it seems the young man simply managed to memorize the entire offensive scheme of the opponent by reviewing the corpses of other people previously killed by Nin Ungan. Honestly, such stunning observation impressed the Golden Dagger deeply, to the core of its soul. Soon Nin Ungan broke into a wheeze, stopped his fierce attack and breathed heavily, and it was then that Bu Yun Sol was able to calmly rest, recovering his breath. Yet the protagonist decided that his opponent was a pathetic fighter. After a whole series of attacks, he had not landed anything except a couple of pieces of flesh. With these audacious words, he clearly pushed the enemy towards a mistake, throwing him off balance. The master noticed. The boy dodged enemy lunges with incredible skill, as if dancing between blades. But a successful counterattack is a completely different matter. Now the young man was in a terrible, miserable state. He was bleeding, so in such exhaustion it was much harder for him to attack and strike. Nin Ungan, cold-bloodedly looking at the arrogant opponent, admitted, even before these conceited words, he wanted to give the boy a chance to survive and surrender. Now I am completely convinced of this. He was literally begging for a quick death, so he was not going to give up on killing and launched an attack, giving it his all. Seeing the enemy rapidly approaching, the boy clearly understood. He had only one single chance to attack and survive. Using the corpses that Nin Ungan left all over the arena, he quickly realized something important. His deadly strikes were always aimed at vital points of the body, primarily at the heart and the victim's head. So when a warrior flared up with the intention to kill the enemy without chances, he aimed exclusively at the upper part of the enemy's body and did not waste strength on anything else. At this critical moment, the boy sharply ducked, slipping away from a deadly attack by a hair's breadth. He aimed at the enemy's vital point and used the last chance. Wise words of his grandfather surfaced in memory. He insisted that blood flow in the solar plexus is difficult to control even for the most skilled martial arts masters. So even if an ordinary child hits this vulnerable spot with full force, they can easily leave an adult unconscious paralyzed. That is why, with his last miserable strength, the protagonist madly rushed into the attack and, finally, with his short blade, pierced the enemy's neck, cutting the artery with a single precise movement. Obviously, after this deadly blow, Nin Ungan, flooding everything around with scarlet blood, died almost instantly and helplessly collapsed to the ground. The protagonist, with his last strength, stood up on trembling legs and, looking at the golden dagger with bloody eyes, wanted to find out, had he passed the trial with dignity. Of course, when Bu Yun Sol was declared the winner, absolutely everyone present was surprised. Even Ho Myung-gak placed much more hope on the student Nin Ungan because of his impeccable physical condition and masterful swordsmanship. But still, the instructor ordered to strike the drums as a sign of the solemn completion of the second brutal test. After which Bu Yun Sol congratulated him for being able to pass this trial, proving his own worth. As soon as the dull drumbeat sounded, Bu Yun Sol suddenly found himself somewhere in the dark corners of his own memories and wandered through a space that was completely white without any boundaries. The old man was looking for his beloved grandson, repeatedly glancing around. No matter what, the boy quickly ran up to him to greet him. But he did not see his grandfather, and this was very strange, because in this nightmarish vision Bu Yun Sol's eyes were torn out and the eye sockets blackened with empty voids. After that heartbreaking vision, Bu Yun Sol abruptly came to his senses and broke free from oblivion. He realized he was lying in the cramped cabin of a ship. In this room, besides him, there were many different fighters, all looking at him as if he were mad, as if he had lost his mind. Then the boy listened to the monotonous noise of the waves they were splashing outside the ship. Obviously, he lost consciousness after heavy blood loss and he was dragged here onto the vessel. All the wounds on his mutilated body were quite serious, deep. But now the boy hardly felt any pain, and that seemed strange. So most likely the demonic palace employed a skilled doctor to help him and patch up the wounds. Moreover, the young man wanted to know who these people were who were near him while he was examining them. They were all very well built, like born warriors. Some faces showed a familiar silhouette. It was clear that all these guys had already passed the first harsh test of physical abilities. The disdain in their looks was also clearly visible, quite logical after his miserable performance. But as soon as the protagonist recovered from the shock and began to understand what was happening around, one of the stern masters was already looming over his head. The master ordered the boys to go out onto the deck. They had already reached the place of the next trial, called the Hellish Path. After that, the young man went down to the deck and asked the tested ones to follow him unconditionally, not lagging behind even a step. It turned out the ship had slowed down right near the blood-red burned lands. Dried sand covered everything, and the ground under the sun cracked as if it had been scorched from within. The task was this: the boys were to be allowed to live in this cursed place for a certain time, undergoing trials. But the examiner was ruthless. He demanded to surrender all clothes and weapons, to change into what they were given, and to take with them the swords prepared in advance. And then everything depended on the tested ones. They could choose any cave that appealed to them and go inside, arranging a dwelling for themselves. And already under the watchful eye of the protagonist young man, the boys began to disperse across the territory, carefully examining various caves, looking at them with interest. Someone found quite comfortable caves. There was almost no smell of dampness and there was enough space. And someone fought for the best places, quarreled incessantly, trying to find out who noticed them first and who would now get the right to occupy them. Observing this fuss, Bu Yun Sol quickly understood one thing: none of them had the slightest idea of what was really happening here. At the second test, these fools suddenly dulled their sense of urgency and danger. Vigilance seemed to have been wiped away by someone with a rag, and they believed that everything was under control. But the protagonist was also watching closely. Those who had already passed the exams were mostly in luxury and expensive, rich clothes, as if each of them was an heir to an influential noble family, a spoiled child. And there was truth in this. The first gathering point was created for only one purpose: to weed out those who might die faster than everyone else, unable to withstand the load. The examiner, who approached the tested from behind, looked surprised. Bu Yun Sol still had not decided on a cave. He acted too slowly and indecisively. Although now was absolutely not the time to wander around the area, wasting precious minutes. But in fact, the man approached the boy because from the very beginning he was struck by the behavior of this boy. The master did not expect that the skinny boy would pass the second bloody test and survive the slaughter, so now, urging him on, the examiner wanted to find out what choice the mysterious young man would ultimately make. The boy pointed to the first cave that caught his eye and did not waste time thinking. But from this cave oozed some incomprehensible viscous substance disgusting to look at, the kind you involuntarily turn away from. Everyone immediately began to shame the boy, insisting that he had truly chosen a godforsaken, disgusting place for himself. Only one master understood the truth. This boy was a true genius in the flesh who could see the hidden. At first glance, the cave seemed small, dirty, and completely unattractive, but that was only its narrow entrance. It scared off fools. But inside, there was so much free space that one could calmly practice martial arts without restricting movements. Moreover, the narrow entrance disarmed the very possibility of an ambush. Enemies could not attack in a crowd. Of course, most people avoided this cave because of its disgusting appearance, but Bu Yun-sol had calculated everything in advance. As soon as everyone decided on the cave, the examiners immediately issued special clothing and promised weapons, as was said. After that, the chief master gathered all the candidates to explain what mission awaited ahead on the hellish path. They say that on the hellish path there were 10 battle halls belonging to different sects. In each, the candidates could learn one of the martial arts of the demonic sections and touch their secrets. Whether to study everything at once or just one, the candidates decided themselves at their own discretion. There was no strict schedule at all. They could sleep or play if they wanted, train together or alone, do whatever they wanted as they decided. But Bu Yun-sol found such uncontrolled conditions and freedom of choice too strange. Hell without mercy, that's what the first 2 trials looked like. These definitely would not let them train peacefully. There would be no avoiding incidents here. And the rest had no idea. They immediately eagerly picked up the conversation, asking where it would be better for them to go first. Many decided to go to the Hall of the Sword of the Fiery Storm. After all, everyone had heard this sect was the strongest of all the demonic sects. Of course, Bu Yun-sol immediately noticed. Most of the candidates went in the same direction like a flock of sheep. As is known, the head of the Hall of the Sword of the Fiery Storm was considered the strongest of the 10 demonic masters, a true legend. Learning the best martial art for the future would be more than useful. However, since the boy had not yet mastered anything in martial arts, there was no need for him to practice advanced techniques without a solid foundation. Therefore, he made a completely different decision and purposefully headed in the opposite direction against all those fools. But very soon the boy came across a small abandoned hut, hidden from prying eyes. At first glance, Bu Yun-sol could not say for sure whether this miserable shack had ever been a training hall. It looked so neglected. This pavilion was related to the Manga Pavilion, a fallen sect barely recognized by other arrogant masters, who openly despised it. But it remained among the 10 only because it had given history many great warriors of the past, those whose traces still burn in memory. He knew all this because his grandfather occasionally told his grandson stories and legends about martial arts while working. So the boy decided to stay here and start learning martial arts right in this neglected place. But suddenly he did not manage to reach the pavilion. The ground beneath his feet trembled threateningly. And it was then that the head of the master of the secret hall of the Manga Pavilion suddenly appeared before him. He immediately realized the young man had come to become one of the 10 demonic masters. Of course, the young man was immensely surprised when the man's head suddenly popped out of the ground like a mole. The protagonist hurriedly and respectfully bowed and explained. He had come here to learn the martial art of the pavilion and to grasp its fundamentals. But the man carefully examined the young man from head to toe with an appraising look, then disdainfully sent him back home. At first, the master did not intend to teach anyone this year at all, especially not such a weak young man as Bu Yun-sol, who looked as if he was already on the brink of death. However, the youth was well informed. It was said that by mastering the martial art of the Manga Pavilion, one could acquire the most powerful life force in the world and strengthen the body. And the man was very surprised that Bu Yun-sol was so well acquainted with their martial art, although the sect had long been forgotten. And the problem was that even true geniuses, with their colossal effort, still had to struggle to master the true techniques of this hall, because these techniques grew out of body reconstruction, breaking bones. And in Bu Yun-sol's current pitiful state, he would have died in less than a day of torment. So, disappearing back into the ground, the man ordered the boy to flee from here without delay, not to waste time in vain. But just as he looked back at the boy one last time, he saw Bu Yun-sol was already standing in a deep bow on his knees and did not move. After that, the young man explained to his teacher as an obedient student. he had to politely and properly greet his master, expressing respect. In the end, the man was convinced. Bu Yun-sol was crazy and stubborn enough not to listen to his teachings and warnings, yet he still agreed to help, subdued by the other's determination. He warned this only because the demonic palace ordered it, not out of kindness of heart. Finally, the man fully emerged from beneath the ground and introduced himself. His name was Master Sa, and he was the master of the secret hall of the Nangya Pavilion, where ancient knowledge is kept. Bu Yun-sol hurried to name himself to this stern man in response, but he, without even hearing the name to the end, sharply stopped the boy. It all boiled down to the fact that, having joined the demonic cult, the boy simply became disciple number 1 and nothing more. Then the old man suggested not wasting time on worthless chatter, and instead quickly get to the essence without delay. As soon as these words were spoken, the master struck the youth with energy just below the eyes, and the protagonist immediately felt a powerful impulse rolling through his body in waves. His gaze faded and impenetrable darkness flashed before his eyes. He saw nothing around, as if blind. However, he heard the master's voice as if it was spreading everywhere like an echo, somewhere without beginning or end. The master asked the boy not to worry in vain. He temporarily sealed his sight, using one of the secret techniques of the pavilion. After all, Bongak, the main unarmed martial art, required this. It was a mandatory procedure to comprehend the beast's path. The beast's path is a martial art that brings all human feelings to the absolute maximum and raises reflexes to the level of a wild animal, sharpening instincts to the edge. Unlike other advanced martial arts, the essence of the techniques of their sect firmly relied on the personal abilities and enlightenment of the practitioner. So even the basics of the beast's path are studied no easier than any other advanced high-level technique. Precisely because of such incredible difficulty, over time, significantly fewer wished to undertake these harsh trials, almost none remained. But if the boy can successfully master the beast's path, it will mean he will gain the abilities of a wild predator and transform. Overall, looking at the radiant master, the protagonist also saw the energy of a wolf. It burst from his body and wrapped around him like an aura. But of course, Master Sa warned, most students do not live to reach such enlightenment, they die in terrible agony. So he, bowing, warned the young man he has about an hour to get used to blindness. After that, the mentor will return to visit and check progress. In the end, the protagonist remained in complete darkness, nowhere to look back, nowhere to see even a little. They say that after losing sight, all other senses sharpen to the limit, but with him this miracle has not yet happened, to his disappointment. But the master assured him, adaptation will take about an hour, no more. So for the boy, this time seemed hellishly long and endless. He only dreamed of getting used as soon as possible, not wasting precious seconds. Eventually, the young man began to crawl on the ground, trying to imagine exactly where he was now and what was happening around him. Because he knew perfectly well, here are a great many martial arts masters who are fighting each other for the right to the demonic master. And if he was destined to fall behind in training, then among these competitors he definitely would not survive. But suddenly the boy felt as if someone urinated behind his back, as if about to swing for a strike. So he dashed to the side and then, rolling over, fell to the ground and immediately began to lose balance. Only now did the protagonist realize an important truth. Having lost sight, he must first focus on the sense of balance in order not to fall. After some time, when an hour had passed, the master came to check on the student. The mentor expected to see a boy wandering through the grass like a lost blind man, helplessly bumping into objects. But he saw something else. The protagonist was in the midst of training, confidently working his feet and moving as he should. This seemed completely unlike the usual, because normally after losing sight a person just sits and passively waits for other senses to sharpen on their own. Instead, the boy was actively moving and, it seemed, even imagining an enemy, as if trying to fight him, practicing strikes and movements. Maybe that is why he adapted much faster than all the other students before. So, having made sure that student number 1 was already accustomed to the pitch darkness, the master decided to move on to the next stage of training. Then he drew a blade from behind his back and involuntarily watched with satisfaction as the boy tried to keep up and dodge his swift strikes. In this harsh regime, 3 long, painful days passed without any rest. And everything the protagonist endured so far boiled down to continuous brutal beatings from his merciless master, who knows no pity. Honestly, even Master Sa was surprised. 3 days had passed and the protagonist still had no questions about the training methods. He continued to silently take the blows, get up and stand again for new ones, without a single complaint. So the master, unable to bear it any longer, decided to find out, why is the hero not at all interested in how to properly dodge or what techniques the mentor uses? But Bu Unsal remembered the teacher's words. The meaning of the pavilion's teaching lies in the practitioner's own abilities and enlightenment, not in ready-made instructions. From these wise words, the young man concluded, every action of the teacher has a significant reason, so one must simply trust the process. And the master, with a completely satisfied smile, admitted the protagonist guessed incredibly accurately. After that, he again struck the scabbard with his blade to continue hitting the boy and test how much he could endure. But at this critical moment, the youth felt something for the first time, as if he saw the sword's trajectory with inner sight, like a bright line. However, even with this insight, he could no longer dodge. The blade was too close, almost touching him. So there was no choice left. He drew his sword and for the first time managed to block the master's strike, repelling the attack. Honestly, the mentor was deeply stunned that his student was able to block the silent sword technique after only 3 days of training. It was an incredible achievement. Yet the striking force was incredible, so the protagonist was thrown away so fast, like a chip in a stream. He sighed deeply and disappointedly. I underestimated the sword technique. Stopping it is much harder than it seemed. The master said nothing. He only immediately handed the hero a bamboo bottle from which he could quench his thirst. He took it for ordinary water, and the protagonist, without hesitation for a moment, took a huge gulp. And then it overwhelmed him. Something was wrong. There was definitely not water in the cup. Energy began to overflow the boy's body, even as if all the lost blood instantly restored, returning strength. It turned out to be water from a divine spring, the very same that the teacher had preserved since time immemorial. And yet the mentor did not regret at all. Finally, he gave her to the one who was worthy of investment. After all, Bu Unsal in his eyes is the most precious uncut diamond from the world of martial arts, hiding colossal potential. As soon as Bu Unsal swallowed the elixir, his training became even more diligent, even more intense without any breaks. But despite the master's seriousness in their training matches, the protagonist step by step grasped how to avoid his strikes, managed to catch the trajectories. The most striking thing was that instant deflection. The boy shifted and disrupted the master's attack, which flew right from behind. And then the mentor, for the first time, completely stopped attacking. When Bu Unsal looked around cautiously, he saw Master Sa laughing joyfully, choking with laughter, because he could not believe that he had finally waited for the genius he wanted to see throughout his long, long life journey. Immediately after these words, the boy's vision finally began to return. The world cleared up. But the teacher joyfully asked the protagonist to forget about becoming one of the 10 demonic masters. Instead, let him become an official disciple of their main sect and dedicate his life to the pavilion. If the protagonist agreed, Master Sa would have turned the boy into one of the strongest masters of the demonic path in just 10 years of persistent training. The protagonist truly pondered this tempting sentence, understanding that given the skill the mentor had shown, he was not lying about what he could teach him over these years. But still, the monster that killed Grandpa was undoubtedly much stronger than the protagonist now. In this situation, the pavilion's martial arts are still not enough to defeat the enemy. Therefore, the boy, as soon as he could keep calm, tried to explain to the mentor he needed to become one of the 10 demonic masters, no matter what. Honestly, the man was even surprised by the boy's determination, but immediately warned it was impossible to learn all the martial arts of the 10 sections. Even the Supreme Grandmaster, like a heavenly demon, could not handle this no matter how much power he had. But despite everything, each martial art requires its own body and its own energy flow, so the training must be special. No matter how talented a man is, at most he will master 2 or 3 styles by focusing. Learning one martial art is the shortest path to becoming stronger on the demonic path, proven by centuries. Yet still, despite this warning, the protagonist, apologizing, made it clear he could not become a permanent student, no matter how much he wanted to. To be honest, the master was a little upset, just tried not to show it and hid his emotions. So after a short pause, he calmly explained to the boy, from now on he could choose another martial art for further training. Of course, the boy explained everything fearfully, had just begun training in the pavilion's basic techniques. Was he really going to leave already? But the master coldly clarified, the true art of the main sect is not passed down through texts or oral tales recorded in words. after which he suddenly attacked it as soon as the protagonist blocked his attack. This is how he proved the boy had already fully learned the beast's path and understood its very essence. Only now, looking at the man with gratitude, the protagonist understood all his attacks during the time the young man was blind were actually forms of the beast path technique, conveyed through strikes. The young man immediately bowed respectfully, thanking the master for the wise teaching and patience. But the master immediately reminded him, he taught the boy only by the order of the demonic palace, nothing more. The protagonist solemnly promised he would never forget the noble deed of the master when he handed him priceless spiritual medicine, saving him from death itself. But even about this, the master asked him to forget. Because the world of martial arts is arranged so, when it comes to nobility or insult, the simplest way is to pay with blood and revenge. Of course, Bai Yinsal did not argue with the wise lord. I bowed to my mentor, thanked him with all my heart for everything, and said goodbye, after which I left. The mentor himself watched him for a long time and kept marveling, where did such a precious stone come from in their lands? It was enough just to look at this boy and his incredible talent, and it immediately became clear. The demonic palace awaits great changes in the future. Meanwhile, the protagonist himself noticed a wonder. As soon as he mastered the beast path, he felt so much around him that he became tired even without doing anything. Otherwise, he would not rest or recover properly. So the boy would have to learn to control the beast path to suppress it. At ordinary times, he tried to mute his sharpened senses as much as possible so as not to keep them constantly in focus. The young man tried to imagine a crane that stops the flow of water, something like that, to stop the turmoil inside. But in the end, he managed at least for some time to completely cast away those annoying feelings. They remained far behind and no longer interfered with living peacefully. So, taking the map in his hands, the protagonist decided to find out what his next step on this path would be. Surely, the demonic palace would not allow them to train forever. Sooner or later it would arrange a trial. Therefore, he might not have much time left before changes. There was no choice. The boy had to decide which pavilion he would go to next to make the best use of the allotted time. Then the boy rushed back into memories of the great master who 700 years ago challenged the heavenly demon. He was the legendary Sword Emperor. The protagonist set out for the strongest of the 10 demonic sects that he once founded. This luxurious battle hall carved from redwood was majestically called Hua Wu. And indeed, as soon as the protagonist approached, it became clear at first glance. Before him was like a royal palace, not a miserable hall of the Nangya pavilion. When the boy knocked, the door was almost instantly opened by a young man eager to understand why the visitor came to them at such a late hour. But it was enough for the mentor to just look at the uniform in which the young disciple was dressed for everything to become perfectly clear. The boy came here not just like that. Bowing in a respectful bow, the hero gently explained the true purpose of his visit. He sought to master the martial art under the guidance of the master. The mentor, without wasting a single moment, led the young apprentice through the open gates. Walking through the corridors of the training pavilion, the master hurriedly began to explain. The art of their school was considered the strongest among all 10 martial schools, thus requiring incredibly long months of persistent study. These are worthy students who arrived in the halls earlier than the hero. They had already successfully completed training in the beginner's hall and moved on to the intermediate level of mastery. So the mentor asked with sincere incomprehension, why did the young man appear here only half a month after the start of training? The protagonist respectfully hurried to explain everything. First, he set out to master the martial art in the Nyangya pavilion to grasp the legendary beast's path. Of course, the master was deeply impressed by what he heard. Although the mentor knew that this boy had considerable talent, he did not expect anyone to master the beast's path in just a miserable 2 weeks. Therefore, he assumed, the teacher from the pavilion simply sent the young man away so as not to waste precious time on his training. Such a resolution seemed much more plausible and expected. Soon the mentor and the apprentice reached the training ground. The young man politely introduced himself as Jin Gak. He was responsible for the beginner's hall. Bu Yun Sol could address him with the title of instructor. However, before starting the session, the mentor decided to clarify with the hero, was he truly confident in his desire to learn their sword techniques? Because it would be much easier and faster for the young man if he went to some other, less demanding training hall. Although the boy sincerely thanked the instructor for such care and concern, he firmly stated he wanted to master precisely the techniques of the renowned sword sect and no others. Sojin Gak had no reason left to restrain the students' enthusiasm. The instructor decisively stepped onto the wooden floorboards and a deafening explosion thundered across the entire training courtyard. As soon as this ended, an ancient scroll smoothly descended from the upper floor. It contained the basic forms and practical principles of the legendary 13 Hua Wu forms. Bu Yun Sol was to learn them to begin full-fledged training. But to great regret, no matter how much the young man stared at those bizarre scrolls, he could not understand what exactly was required of him and how to even start the training. Of course, Jin Hak could not believe such improbability. Could this boy not read combat diagrams? The mentor fell into complete shock, just now fully convinced the student truly lacked this necessary skill. Bu Yun Sol had to awkwardly and with obvious embarrassment explain. Before he got involved in the demonic cult, he had never studied the art of fencing, so such schemes remained a dark forest to him. These words struck Jin Hak with unprecedented surprise, all the more strange since he was listed as a full-fledged novice among the students. And even during the second trial, his movements did not resemble any of the formal sword styles known in the Celestial Empire. Yet the most surprising thing was this: the boy could not read even the simplest sword diagrams. However, if you look at this unfortunate situation from another perspective, considering the boy's lightning-fast reflexes and impressive attention to the smallest details he showed during the second trial, he undoubtedly had brilliant prospects for success. Especially if you take into account the boy's common sense in how he chose a cave to live in the mountains. And if this gifted student receives proper training from an experienced mentor, it is hard to imagine what an incredible martial arts monster he could become. After all, Jin Hak was not at all upset by the news that reached him. The boy really could not read intricate diagrams with drawn poses, but he recognized symbols and hieroglyphs simply wonderfully. On the ancient poster, a calligraphic inscription gave instructions how to master the body and flow without the slightest effort, like a mountain stream. After careful reading, Jin Hak immediately hurried to explain the essence of the first part. Free the body meant complete muscle relaxation and smooth, natural movement when applying sword techniques. In particular, the student needed to relax the muscles of the abdomen and thighs so that chi energy could freely circulate throughout the body. In the end, the young man relaxed as much as he could at that moment. A disgusting sight, but it was in this that Jin Hak suddenly clearly understood how incredibly dissonant it was that he had to teach someone such elementary basics. The mentor asked the boy to straighten up and patiently explained, when he tenses his body, he must block the flow of chi at certain points. At the same time, the mind should be calmed and relaxed, discarding all extraneous thoughts and anxieties. Next, Jin Hak showed him the correct fighting stance, the very one used for the next, more complex part of the diagram. But this boy took the correct position almost instantly and watched every move like a born martial arts genius, catching everything on the fly. Eventually, already after the very first repetition, the outside of his body became flawless, such that it no longer required any additional adjustments. After this, they continued their preparation with doubled zeal. Not much time had passed, and the young man was already dancing with his blade as if a skilled master who had devoted many years of life to fencing. Watching this mesmerizing spectacle, Jin Gak realized with surprise the boy was a natural fencer, gifted by the gods of martial arts with an exceptional talent. Now that the basic training was successfully completed, the instructor asked the boy to perform in front of an imaginary opponent and execute all 13 forms of Hua Wu from beginning to end. This was a mandatory condition for the successful completion of the hall for beginners and the transition to the next level of mastery. Jin Hak had to truly feel the purpose and intent in the technique of the young student. Of course, he was still nervous before the decisive trial, but the hero firmly decided to show himself as befits a true warrior, and the test caught up with him faster than he initially thought. Ultimately, the protagonist stood against himself, against the faceless enemy he simply had to defeat in a fair duel. As soon as this enemy appeared in his imaginary vision, the boy immediately grabbed the hilt of his faithful sword tightly. And then he abruptly used the 13th form, returning the wind to its original source, cutting the opponent in half with a single, merciless strike. After that, the young warrior methodically went on the attack from the first to the last 13th form, demonstrating the mastery of his art down to the smallest detail. But no matter what, Jin Gak could not believe his own eyes. Bu Yun Sol showed the usual 13 forms of Hua Wu in a completely different way than all previous students. Everyone who has mastered this art knows well. The third position, the melting cloud, must be soft and flowing, like a heavenly cloud soaring high above. But the version the young man showed turned out to be incredibly sharp and aggressive, like a lightning flash cutting through a stormy night. So Jin Gak immediately guessed. The boy deliberately reshaped the initial form into his own unique style. But usually no one below the level of honorary grandmaster would dare to commit such sacrilege against the classical technique. Moreover, this adapted form carried a colossal will to kill and was aimed at a specific person, whose death the boy fervently sought to avenge for his close one. It really looked incredible, a breathtaking spectacle. The Hua Wu technique, known since ancient times for its righteousness and nobility even within demonic cults, turned into a refined likeness of evil and became truly demonic, merciless. At that very moment, the young fencer panicked. In horror, he realized that the trajectory of his blade was insidiously disrupted due to the incorrect position of the fingertips on the hilt. He understood probably the reason was the destructive influence of the beast's trope, which he had already felt in the Anank Pavilion. The higher he rose through the Hua Wu forms, the more clearly the sinister trace of this beastly technique appeared in his movements. No matter how much the hero strove, he would never fully master the initial form of Hua Wu this way. And even if by a miracle he could complete all 13 forms, these would not be the sacred forms of Hua Wu, but a completely new, never-before-seen fighting style. So the protagonist tried with all his might to perform the original form flawlessly and with dignity, to endure this decisive trial. But as soon as this fateful moment came, an impenetrable veil of confusion suddenly fell upon the hero. His faceless, imaginary enemy instantly turned into the very same vile murderer of his beloved grandfather. Unaware that all this was just cunning games of the mind and illusion, Bu Yun Sol completely lost his mind from the boundless, all-consuming thirst for revenge. He used 13 forms at his own discretion, with particular cruelty and fury. The instructor, who was watching this bloody slaughter from the side, clearly understood. In all his long service, he had never seen such a fast and furious fighter. However, the imaginary enemy gave Bu Yun Sol no pause, relentlessly calling him to attack. So until the imaginary enemy finally finished him off, Bu Yun Sol was forced to use all the last sword forms without any exceptions. But at this tragic moment, the protagonist repeated the terrible fate of his late grandfather. He saw with horror how bloodstains spread over his trembling hands. The merciless hand of the imaginary opponent cut off both hands of the fencer, and as soon as the young man came to his senses and broke free from the nightmare visions, he realized cold sweat was still running down his pale forehead. Watching this sad spectacle, the most logical conclusion for Jin Gak was that Bu Yun Sol had suffered defeat in the imaginary fight against the ghost of the past. But despite this unfortunate ending, the young student still successfully passed the trial. The whole point was that in the beginner's hall, the mentors were evaluating nothing else but the student's grip and whether he was capable of applying the 13 forms of Hua Wu in real combat. And all the instructor could say with a clear conscience boiled down to one thing: Bu Yun Sol demonstrated all these requirements in perfect form, exceeding all expectations. The blade, slipping from the weakened fingers of the young man, clattered against the ground, and Jin Hak sincerely praised him for the flawless execution of all 13 forms and solemnly invited him to move to the middle hall for further improvement. The hero, showing neither excitement nor sincere gratitude, stared at instructor Jin Hak, fully understanding how incredibly difficult it was for him to teach a person with zero knowledge about the sword. And yet the mentor took on this thankless task, patiently guiding the student through each stage of comprehension. So the hero, bowing deeply as a sign of profound respect, sincerely thanked the master for everything he had done for him. But then Jin Hak only asked, "Let the boy continue to train as diligently as he had all these days." Still, the instructor noticed with concern the young man's sword carried a very clear, unhidden intent to kill. Therefore, Bu Yun Sol needed to act extremely carefully so as not to let this all-encompassing desire completely consume him and turn him to darkness. After these instructions, they finally said goodbye as mentor and student, and Jin Hak once again was convinced Bu Yun Sol truly mastered the legendary beast path in just a miserable 2 weeks. Moreover, thanks to his unique, truly terrifying speed of learning, the young man managed to graduate from the beginner's hall earlier than expected. At first, Jin Hak seriously doubted whether the inexperienced boy would manage to reach the middle hall within the allotted time. But now the mentor was firmly convinced. Even the strict instructor of the middle hall would definitely recognize Bu Yun-sol's outstanding potential. However, as soon as this boy appeared in the training room of the middle hall, the local instructor, who did not know who he was, rudely ordered him to leave, not disturbing the classes. Obviously, the stern man simply decided. Bu Yun-sol had just finished the beginner's hall, and since it took the young man more than 20 days, he supposedly was wasting precious time trying to pass the middle hall. But bowing sincerely, Bu Yun-sol tried politely to explain the reason for being late to training. He spent the first 2 weeks in the Nyangya Pavilion Hall. The man could not believe it. Could this boy have finished the Nyangya Hall so quickly, and it was even a hall for beginners? The instructor immediately decided. Surely the young man is not capable of mastering the beast's path, so he fled from there with a shameful face and is now seeking solace here. But since the boy still completed the beginner's hall by all the rules, the stern instructor sighed and agreed, let him join the other students. Although the man seriously doubted that the youth would catch up on all the missed material and not fall behind the group. The mentor explained, the technique of the Hua Wu sword sect is a martial art built on swift, instantaneous movements. So if a person does not yet wield the sword well enough and control their own body, in the heat of battle they might accidentally injure even themselves. Because of this, the techniques of their sect are incredibly difficult to apply in real combat. Therefore, the man generously promised not to pay attention to the victories or defeats of students in duels, only to evaluate how skillfully they wield the sword and apply the learned forms. After that, the instructor authoritatively called one of the students forward and asked, let him choose a worthy opponent for a training duel. Sitting down, leaning on the floor with a bold smile, the chosen student asked for clarification. Are there any restrictions on choosing an opponent for the duel? And as soon as the mentor said there were no restrictions, the confident youth immediately pointed at Bu Yun-sol and mercilessly made him his opponent. The instructor, of course, doubted the correctness of such a choice. This boy just joined them and was hardly ready for a full-fledged duel. But the student reminded the mentor he himself allowed choosing any enemy. But these cheeky words only further upset the instructor. He did not understand what skill the student intended to show if he chose an opponent who just came out of the beginner's hall. However, standing up from his place, Bu Yun-sol dryly explained, he was ready to accept the challenge of this confident student. But in the novice hall, the young man was taught to wield a sword by instructor Jin Hak, so the boy thought he could catch up faster on what was lost if he clashed blades with another student in a real duel. But the mentor of the intermediate hall decided otherwise. The boy was simply trying to defend his own pride, because with the skills of only the novice hall, he would never win. Since the protagonist had already accepted the challenge, there was no point in arguing. The instructor pointed to the swords and emphasized, the main virtue of a martial arts master is to soberly assess one's own abilities. Therefore, he hoped that Bu Yun-sol's skills would justify his presence in this hall. At the same time, the arrogant student almost glowed with joy. The chance to show strength to beat the hero was rare. After all, there were so many talented boys in the pavilion that he really got lost against their background, and Bu Yun-sol, in his opinion, was a pathetic weakling. So if he managed to hit him precisely in this fight, it would only strengthen the duelist's position among the other students. Before the duel began, the opponent honestly admitted to Bu Yun-sol he was completely impressed by the young fighter's courage. But the boy was still convinced, in this world, pride and fighting spirit alone will not save you. As soon as the words sounded at the instructor's signal, he immediately rushed into battle with some inhuman rage. But despite Bu Yun-sol's swift strike, he easily managed to dodge thanks to his beastly instinct. Immediately after that, he continued to fend off the enemy's attacks, even though it occasionally caused some inconvenience. The attacker himself was glad. He saw how Bu Yun-sol was struggling. So I was convinced he really was a novice. The duelist was ready to swear that he could handle this clumsy idiot. He even decided to show the true mastery of the Hua Wu sect's techniques. Then the student applied the attack of the first form out of 13 forms of the sect. But the hero managed to skillfully dodge every strike so not a single hair fell from his head. The instructor, who was observing the duel, realized the student from the middle hall holds the sword at a very mediocre level. And the novice dodged not because of speed. His movements were almost like predicting the future. Could the boy really have learned the beast's path? And even if, according to the mentors, it was only the basic combat technique of the pavilion, In reality, it turned out to be an extremely difficult art accessible only to great masters. And no matter how gifted the boy was, no one managed to grasp all of this in 2 weeks. So the instructor interrupted the hero with a loud kick to the floor. He warned he would not be able to assess the youth's abilities if he only dodged. The duel was aimed at testing swordsmanship, instincts, and reflexes, so Bu and Su had to take the fight more seriously. In the end, having no other choice, the protagonist had to stop and strike the opponent with a sword form. And even the spectators, all without exception, immediately gaped in surprise. But it immediately became clear, these were not the standard forms of the sect, something completely different was traced here. Only one fool duelist had not yet recognized this. He confidently believed that he would easily dodge the strike by closing his eyes. And only then did he realize that young man possessed the very same techniques they had been learning all this time. So the boy was deliberately hiding his skills to mock him in front of everyone, or maybe he was just trying to get the instructor's attention and transfer to the next hall. Obviously, the guy panicked. He saw the attentive gazes fixed on him. He knew if he lost to Bu Yun Sol, he would disgrace himself in front of everyone. So he decided he would rush first into the advanced hall. For this, he used the Asura sword technique that severs blood. Watching this, the instructor did not intervene after all. He never specified that only Hua Wu techniques were allowed in the duel. But the man still flinched as soon as he realized. Bu Yun Sol did not lose his balance even in such a situation. Meanwhile, the mentor increasingly doubted. Could the hero really have learned the beast's path in 2 weeks? While the attacker went mad watching how the opponent skillfully dodged the attacks, but he swore to kill him. After which the duelist launched an attack and used the bloody wind technique, the one that destroys the very moon. But no one even had time to flinch, and at that very moment the deadly energy was exhausted. Thanks to the 13th form technique, the extreme martial art, without a beginning, Bu Yun Sol managed to stop the enemy. Eventually, the hero struck with the tip of the sword into the solar plexus and the opponent fell to the ground, losing consciousness. All the others froze in place, mouths agape in astonishment. But when they looked at the body lying in its own blood, they realized Bu Yun Sol, it seemed, had killed his enemy. The same young man, as if nothing had happened, returned to the stand, took the sword, and calmly put it back. The instructor had already confirmed the student was truly dead. It turned out the strike hit a vital point. No wonder the man immediately suspected. Perhaps Bu Yun Sol had once been a student of the Nangyan Pavilion. He decided to find out if the boy had really managed to learn the beast's path in half a month, and the boy replied, he was taught only the basics. The instructor became even angrier at this answer, deciding that the boy had been taught to lie too well in the pavilion. After that, he ordered the hero to be silent. He was not going to listen to his excuses. Instead, he could start cleaning up the body. Others could no longer believe it. Bu Yun Sol would not even be punished for killing a person right during a regular sparring. But the instructor went mad, you see, at these frightened, miserable students. That is why he remembered this place was not a real fighting hall just by name. They were in hell, and if someone used a deadly technique, they had to be ready to die from a counterattack. After which the test continued for the rest of the students. Very soon, only a handful of the defeated remained, those who could not pass this test. So the instructor kicked them out the door and ordered them to find another hall that would agree to accept them. Of course, they begged the mentor to give them one more chance to prove their strength. But it was impossible. At least they could enter the beginner's hall thanks to their good physical abilities. But to master the technique of the Hua Wu sword, one must be a combat genius capable of surpassing the limits of their own body with incredible effort. The students who remained alive could not handle this because they did not have the abilities for it. So the instructor sternly drove these boys away, far out of sight. Eventually, when everyone had left, only one single hero remained in the hall, and he did not know where to go. When the instructor approached him, the boy fearfully thought that he too would be driven away. So the mentor had to lay everything out clearly. If the young man won the duel and passed the test, he could calmly advance to the advanced hall. But Bu Yun Sol stubbornly preferred to stay in the intermediate hall instead. But now he had only learned the basics of 13 forms, and in the intermediate hall he had not yet managed to master anything. Honestly, the instructor was stunned by the young man. Not only had he learned the beast's path, but he also repelled the chaotic style of the Asura sect, yet the mentor still did not find satisfaction in this level. Precisely because the boy was not going to give up, the mentor decided to take on his training. He was going to explain to him the technique of the back row sword, the one that follows the 13 forms of Hua Wu. However, he warned, he despises everyone who learns various tricks just to impress others. And if he notices even the slightest hint that the boy studied fencing beyond the Hua Wu techniques, he will immediately be beheaded. But only 4 days later, his stern facial expression flared up with complete incomprehension. He trained the hero for 4 days and studied him from all sides. But the boy's foundation in fencing was almost zero. It was hard to believe this boy, despite all his skills, had barely just begun learning to wield a sword. And his determination was simply incredible. He gave his all in every move, as if he would die if he failed. Now this man perfectly understood how the hero managed to master the beast's path in just half a month. Finally, the young man learned and perfected the strikes of the back row sword technique, the extreme lightning strikes. And at that very moment, when Bu Yun Sol was in the midst of training, the instructor ordered him to stop. As soon as the young man froze, the mentor immediately explained. The boy had already grasped the entire sword technique, so additional training was unnecessary. After this, he also explained, this sword technique is just a style that requires different body turns for quick switching between speed forms. Moreover, all its forms are created precisely for such sword movements around the body, so it is literally useless in real combat. Yet the instructor noticed, Bu Yun Sol tries to use literally every form in battle as if he wants to kill someone. And still, despite these words, the mentor explained the main goal of the sword style here was not at all this. As it turned out, most demonic martial arts require a thirst for killing, and the Hua Wu sect rejected such thinking, the idea that one exists only to kill opponents and rise above. But the thirst for killing lived in the boy's head. If he does not wipe it out from there, he will create a sword style that will strike himself. And these words were exactly the same as those of instructor Jin Gak, so Bu Yun Sol was not surprised at all. The man himself explained, both in the past and now he lives with the same feeling of thirst for killing. Without any doubts, he got rid of all who stood in his way. Because of this, his status, honor, and even mastery of martial arts fell to a lower level. Yet the desire to kill, as it may seem, pulls a person to heights. In reality, it is only an obstacle blocking the way up. From this moment, Bu Yun Sol had to get rid of this feeling, because the past of all martial arts masters is stained with regret and failures. Therefore, all members of the martial arts world did not like to talk about their past, just like Bu Yun Sol's grandfather. But then the hero himself became curious after this revelation. Why was the instructor so kind to him, like a caring mentor? It turned out that the man simply recognized himself in the boy. He had gone through the same torments and doubts in the past, feeling the same things. After that, the instructor finally dared to find out the young man's name and addressed him by name. He also understood. When Jin Hak told him about the one who survived the second trial, it was exactly about Bu Yun Sol. But the protagonist had a serious flaw. He lacked a solid foundation in martial arts. His future opponents were young people with great prospects. From the youngest years, they trained in martial arts and absorbed techniques literally with their mother's milk. As soon as the hero began to delve into the more serious aspects of the Hua Wu sword in the advanced hall, the difference in their skills would become even greater, like a chasm between heaven and earth. To catch up with that difference, Bu Yun Sol needed to rapidly master higher martial arts and lay a solid foundation for further study of techniques. So today the instructor, to fill the gap, ordered to pass to the boy the Jiangro Musin technique, created by him personally and filled with years of his own experience. However, the mentor warned, while studying it, he himself once made a fatal mistake, and after that all the nerves in his fingers irreversibly dulled. This technique is so dangerous that Bu Yun Sol could completely lose control over his own hands. Then the hero risked not advancing to the next hall, but becoming a miserable cripple without hands. He wouldn't even be able to hold a sword. Therefore, the instructor directly asked, was the boy willing to accept this risk, understanding the full threat? But the answer was obvious. The hero was ready to give even his own soul for his revenge, not to mention his hands. Thus, a whole month passed from the day the boy began studying the Jiangro Musin technique tirelessly, day and night. Before leaving the intermediate hall, the instructor said that the young man had managed quickly, although it took more time than he initially assumed. He mastered the basic techniques in the beginner's hall and the more complex ones at the intermediate level, until Bu Yun Sol was able to advance further along the warrior's path. And again, he was late this time to the advanced hall, where others had arrived much earlier. Looking around the room, Bu Yun-sol felt everything here was different, as if the very air within these walls was soaked with power, danger, and a cold premonition of evil. Moreover, he now sensed a different energy in these students, not the one from the intermediate hall. It was mature, heavy, threatening. And in their eyes, the former contempt was already vanishing, which was not surprising. The boy who had dared to boast before the hero was killed, and he paid for his pride with his life. Still, to Bu Yun-sol, it seemed a miracle. Caring for corpses caused them disgust, while killing another person was honor and respect in this insane world. The instructor recognized in the boy who appeared the very Bu Yun-sol he had heard much about, and warned that the lesson had not yet begun. He invited the hero to sit and join the other students. Once they had a new student, the old man again began to explain the Hua Wu sword song and the 7 sacred students to refresh their knowledge. All teachings, this is the power that flows through the entire body. Stand straight, maintain unshakable balance, chest wider, back straight, and do not chop too eagerly on the first strike, keep the same rhythm afterwards. But the young man had mastered the more complex technique in the intermediate hall, and in the advanced hall understood everything noticeably faster than the others. As a result, the lesson ended too quickly. Before the old man let the students go home, he asked Bu Yun-sol to stay a little longer for a special conversation. After that, the mentor took the young man outside to walk in silence. There the old man focused on an ancient saying, "No sword can defeat a sword." This phrase meant reaching a level when a person is able to defeat an armed enemy, even without a blade in hand. Simply put, whether a warrior with a sword or without it, his strength should not depend on the weapon. And he decided to prove it when a fragment of an ordinary branch suddenly turned into a real deadly blade aimed straight at the young man's head. After this, the mentor asked the boy to imagine, as if attacked suddenly, hands empty, but fencing skills still need to be applied to survive. The old man explained to the pensive hero. While he wandered in the middle hall, the students here had already mastered the first sword technique, Hua Wu, the dazzling depth. And now they have even reached the stage of philosophical reflections on the essence of the sword. But if the boy does not understand what the man just asked him, he will immediately leave the hall without the right to return. So he had to answer very carefully and thoughtfully. Ultimately, the hero's answer turned out to be very simple. If he does not have a sword, he must use his opponent's blade. Then the young man rushed forward and tried to snatch the old man's weapon with a swift throw. And just as he set off, the old man was already behind him and grabbed him by the collar for his hasty, thoughtless step. Panicked, the hero continued to attack from all sides. But the movements of the old one were impossible to predict. He seemed to be a being that simultaneously exists at all points in space. So it was extremely difficult to understand where he would be the next moment. Bu Yun-sol had no idea that the clever old man would come within reach. But the fact that he could even track the mentor's movements was both surprising and inspiring. But if he shows nothing now, the old man will not allow him to stay in the advanced hall. Therefore, the hero decided to push the beast's excitement to the absolute limit and read the mentor's movement direction Sol just to touch the weapon he held in his hands, even with the tips of his fingers. Eventually, he succeeded, but as soon as it happened, the boy was sharply thrown back. The pressure of the converging energies knocked him off balance. He had already decided, that's it, he failed at the most important moment. But as soon as the young man barely managed to stand up, the old man confidently helped him to his feet, and the mentor laughed, delighted that Bu Yun-sol had passed his test. The boy was stunned, the task fell into his hands without any problems, and he did not strike his opponent at all. The smiling old man explained to the young man, starting tomorrow he will be able to begin studying the new technique, invited him to the training ground. But the hero had to come before dawn. That way he would be earlier than all the students and receive special training. The protagonist did not ask about anything unnecessary, immediately bowed respectfully and said goodbye to the old man, thanking him for his trust. As soon as the boy left, the man looked at the stick. It was crumbling and breaking apart right in his hands after a brief fight with the hero. At that moment, looking at the young man's face, he realized even the wolf cub still harbored the danger of an adult, mad wolf within him. So the old man eagerly awaited what the boy would demonstrate to him next. And the hero himself rejoiced. Today the lessons were over, and he could cultivate energy, or even take up the study of the infernal path. After what happened to him in the middle hall, he could not be sure that suddenly somewhere a fight to the death would not break out. And suddenly somewhere far away the young man heard someone's footsteps. They were approaching. carrying a terrifying intent. The feeling of a beast told him 5 people had come for his soul. When the hero turned around, he saw classmates, those who since the middle hall considered Bu Yun Sol to be too arrogant, and now they were going to rid him of this harmful habit in a very cruel way. And since the boy was the first to kill another student, the 5 known as the strongest swords were supposed, allegedly, to skillfully teach him a good lesson. But the hero immediately realized there were not 5 of them, it was a deceitful trap. He also felt the presence of a 6th, the one hiding in the shadows. And yet the young man immediately took a fighting stance, preparing for a fight not for life but for death. Seeing the fighting stance, the Great 5 exploded with rage. They decided that this boy underestimated their strength and skill. The irritable leader drew his blade, the intent to attack was obvious. But in a moment, a strike with all his might hit him in the neck. He choked on blood from coughing, fell off his feet and collapsed to the ground, losing consciousness. The one who stopped him was a handsome but no less terrifying warrior named So Jin Ha. Catching Bu Yun Sol with his gaze, he gave the boy a sign. They had something to discuss alone. 4 of the 5 still could not comprehend what So Jin Ha was doing here, and why he attacked their comrade without any warning. That warrior coldly ordered them to peacefully get out of his way. They did not interest him. Small fry, not worth attention. And of course, having taken the defeated leader, they, looking around fearfully, disappeared completely. But they swore that next time they would deal with Bu Yun Sol when So Jin Ha was not around. After that, the boy, as if nothing had happened, pressed the blade to the hero and made it clear. Now the real conversation could begin. Memories shifted to the previous day, to the old man's lesson. The mentor explained. The students really studied the first sword technique, Hua Wu, dazzling depth, but to claim they had fully mastered it, they would only be able to when they created their own unique sword form. So he decided to check what they had created. First, the old man called Bu Yun Sol to the stage and asked him to perform the first technique in front of everyone. Standing on the stage, the boy exhaled heavily. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he felt the pressure of dozens of eyes. Immediately after that, the youth drew all 13 strikes one after another with flawless precision. The old man, observing the movements, saw the boy took the most serious, the most complex sword technique and transformed it into something created solely for killing without any beauty. He calmly asked the hero to return to his place and called the next student from the hall. The very next in line was a warrior named So Jin Ha. As soon as he stepped onto the stage, Bu Yun Sol immediately noticed a strange movement of his sword. It contained a hidden meaning. During the demonstration of his technique, he confidently performed a counterattack against the one Bu Yun Sol had shown in the arena, as if warning, this is important. But now the hero had not the slightest idea what exactly So Jin Ha was trying to tell him. And only the young man, maddened by misunderstanding, decided that the hero was pretending to be a fool, unwilling to admit the obvious. Of course, the warrior perfectly understood. Not everyone gathered within the school walls to become one of the demonic masters. And indeed, if you think about it, coming here is an incredible chance to master the art, and literally nothing was needed to participate, only the desire. Yet this opportunity turns out to be a treacherous trap for unwanted people who sneak into the student ranks. That is why Bu Yun Sol, apparently, suspected. So Jin Ha's anxiety was not empty among the school students. There are spies planted from outside. The warrior himself, reading Bu Yun Sol's facial expression and voice, immediately realized the boy was truly impressed, so his eyes did not lie. So he sighed in disappointment, feeling a bitter clarity emerging in everything. The spy turned out not to be the hero, and So Jin Ha was just about to have fun with the spy and extract all the secrets from him. Then the turning warrior calmly walked away, but at the end asked, "From now on the hero must not stand out too much in the training hall and must behave like a good student, and then everything will be fine with him. But if the boy continues to behave in a way that tests his patience, then So Jin Ha will simply get rid of him without unnecessary ceremonies." With these words he disappeared, leaving the hero in deep thought. Having learned that spies were prowling in this place, the boy could not calm down for a long time and clearly understood he still did not know at all what was happening around. He thought that he was suspected because he was simultaneously making every effort to study the arts of the Nyang Pavilion and the Hua Wu sect. However, for now the young man decided not to worry whether a spy or some demon. It was just an enemy that Bu Yun Sol would sooner or later have to face in battle. Finally, the training day came to an end. The old man, having finished the lesson, revealed a smile, looked around the class, and imagined how tired the students were after this hard day of training. But he remembered the main thing. Even masters who had survived many real battles always found time to study the principles of advanced martial arts. Because in this matter, knowledge does not yet mean ability. Instead, the ability to do something is the true, real knowledge. Therefore, the interpretation of principles from the old man, which he had been teaching the students until now, could become a reliable support for everyone tested in the world of martial arts. So he wished all who studied under him success in all future battles and trials. At that moment, everyone heard the gong strike. The sound spread around and announced an important event. It meant time was up, so the old man ordered the students to prepare to be sent to the mountain in the center of the island. Something important awaited them there. When everyone had already arrived there, they were met by a golden dagger with a bloody eye. Looking through each student keen and scrutinizing, he solemnly declared, "From this moment, the third trial will begin." Of course, all the kids immediately started whispering, excited and anxious as soon as they heard about the third trial. After all, they were sure it was supposed to be the second, not the third. But Bu Unsal clearly remembered that merciless fight to the death that he had gone through, and that was exactly the second trial. But it seemed the others had no idea about it, so no one was going to explain anything. The master explained, "Soon all the caves will be sealed with magical seals until 10 candidates are chosen. Until that time comes, no one will be able to return to these caves." That is why he suggested to the worried students to gather in advance and prepare everything necessary for survival. And obviously, one person in the crowd was extremely curious. By what principle will these very candidates be chosen? As soon as Jin Hak opened his mouth to explain something, Hek Ren Yun immediately shamed all these disgraced ones. They are on the demoness trail, so their trial is to cut each other out until only the strongest remain. The golden dagger wanted them to kill until only the last 10 survivors remained. The task was not too difficult, so any sufficiently strong warrior could handle it. Of course, the mentor ordered the frightened to hide in the shadows and avoid open clashes like cowardly rats. But he perfectly understood this would not help them much. Over time, the area where one can still stay will steadily shrink, and those who remain in the forbidden zone will hurry to die. For this, he deployed Phantoms to Thema, top-secret elite squad of fighters tasked with ruthlessly eliminating those who failed the tests. And honestly, their deadly aura was so vast and terrifying that the boys felt a sense of pressure even though they were standing deep in the very heart of the crowd. Even so, Jin Ha immediately realized, these are true masters with skills honed over incredible years. But still, one of the students suddenly gathered courage and asked the golden dagger, can they attack the phantoms in response? This cheeky question greatly amused the old man. He made it clear, those who dream of entering the top 10 must be ready to fight any opponent, no matter how strong they are. Of course, they could arrange a fight with the phantoms even to the point of killing them, if the students had enough strength and skill. The mentor also stunned the listeners. If someone manages to deal with even one of the phantoms, they will be immediately listed among the 10 chosen candidates without any other trials. So the conclusion was only one: killing a single phantom is much harder than wiping out a whole bunch of weak students nearby. Hek Ren and himself warned the kids, you can act alone or you can gather in gangs setting ambushes and traps. They didn't care, the main thing was to kill. The students had to use any means to achieve the goal, to become chosen. Hardly had this trial begun and the tested scattered in all directions like frightened animals, rushing at full speed, fleeing from danger. The hero perfectly understood. In such a short time he attracted too much attention from other students, so it would be wiser to disappear from sight for a while. If he hadn't hit the right strategy, he could have fallen into a trap just like when 5 students went against him at once. At first, the protagonist decided to hide in a safe place, and he knew exactly one suitable spot. It was the remote Nangya pavilion where he studied together with Master Sa, away from prying eyes. As soon as the young man ran across the ground, he realized the soil beneath his feet felt completely different, as if alive. Then he touched the ground with his palm to check what exactly was wrong with it. But at that very moment, the animal's senses suggested 3 fighters were rapidly approaching him. The first to jump out of the bushes was a young boy who frantically began begging Bu Yun Sol for rescue because some freaks had latched onto him and were trying to kill him for no reason. The blood flowing from him made it hard to breathe. He tried to cough and promised he would not remain guilty before the hero if he helped him. The boy cold-bloodedly examined the newcomer, trying to understand whether he was a lure or not. But the wounds on his body looked too real, believing his story was not that difficult. Moreover, only 3 pursuers were trailing him. Obviously, they had managed to unite into one group. Bu Yun Sol was not at all eager to get involved in this trouble. But if someone found out where he was now and informed others, then it would become a real disaster. And at that very moment, as if out of nowhere, a hollow in the ground suddenly opened before them, one that could hide them from the pursuers. When the trio of pursuers finally appeared in the clearing, they did not catch the boy. He swiftly dived away from them and disappeared as if he had never been there. Of course, they went mad. They wanted to make him their first victim in this trial, but since no one was nearby, they had to look for new prey. As soon as everyone scattered, the hero burst out from under the ground, and right after, the boy he had just saved climbed out. He was immensely grateful and didn't even know how to repay. Without Bu Yun Sol, he would have definitely said goodbye to life on this cursed day. The hero looked into the pit and immediately understood it was made not only for hiding. It turns out Master Saw specifically prepared it for him. Being inside, the young man felt how incredibly quickly his beast trail senses caught the sounds of footsteps, heavy ones that crushed the earth, and the clanging of sword fights. Every vibration reached him crystal clear. The situation became so clear as if he saw everything with his own eyes. So the hero concluded, the master wanted to teach him that the beast's trail relies on earth vibrations to find enemies, even those hidden from sight. At that moment, the hero calmly looked at the boy from the school with a demanding, testing gaze, and the body betrayed a shudder of fear. But trying to hide his panic, he hurried to introduce himself, a young man named Jim Hall N, a native of the Bloody Sect. After that, he decided to learn the name of his generous savior. But the hero never told him his name. The protagonist immediately turned around and went his own way, not wanting to waste time on empty talk, and Jim Hall N trailed behind him like an annoying shadow. He rushed to explain everything. As soon as the third trial started, he immediately went into the forest, but he was still attacked and chased, which made him feel uneasy. The guy just wanted to travel alongside the hero. After all, Bu Yun Sol even hid him from enemies, so Jim Hall N decided maybe he could be trusted after all. Bu Yun Sol said nothing in response, calmly turned away from the annoying boy. But the good-natured young man from the Bloody Sect decided that this was silent consent, so he happily ran up to his comrade and now was going to travel together with him. But for a moment, something strange flashed across his face. The smile was no longer as good-natured as it had been all this time. Soon the two reached another fairly open glade. The hero placed his hand on the ground and tried to read the vibrations around. It was then that he realized they would have to go around because nearby someone was fighting wildly. And Gum Hall N really wanted the hero to teach him to also feel vibrations, since this talent was incredibly useful in battle. Bu Yun Sol said nothing and began to retreat, but suddenly heard from afar someone swore, despite everything, to avenge his brothers. This sharp feeling of revenge was painfully familiar to the young man, as if the whole atmosphere around was soaked through with it. Gum Hall N immediately noticed. The hero's face changed sharply, although there seemed to be no external reason. But he coldly explained. He decided to slightly revise the plan and still join the fight he already heard ahead. Eventually, they cautiously made their way through the bushes to see the fight without revealing themselves. No one suspected that at this very moment an ambush was already unfolding above his head. However, as soon as the young assassin attacked the hero from above, he stopped the blow without any difficulty. He put his blade up to block. Of course, the killer was shocked by the opponent's reaction. The hero blocked his deadly technique of the forbidden extreme invisible art. So, considering the enemy's skill, he involuntarily recognized Bu Yun Sol as just as professional a killer as himself. But the hero did not say a word, and with just one strike from the 13 forms of Hua Wu, he sliced the enemy's body in half like a sheet of paper. In fact, the young man knew perfectly well, this opponent was strong because his skill in concealing presence was incredibly accurate. If Bu Yun Sol had not mastered the beast's trail skills, he would have had to spend more time learning to resist this dangerous enemy. After that, the hero returned to the path and immediately popped out from behind the bushes, watching intently. With the help of the beast's trail, he sensed everything around. The people there continued to fight mercilessly. So he became quite curious. If he helped that young man who was fighting, would he feel the sweet satisfaction of revenge? When he realized that their enemy was already too weakened by wounds, the attackers decided The only thing left was to finish him off as quickly as possible. And out of respect for the sign, they even promised to kill quickly without unnecessary suffering. But it was nothing, because at that very moment, the hero engaged in battle alone, charging at the whole crowd of enemies without trembling for a moment. Of course, everyone was shocked when they realized the boy they were about to kill had actually managed to call his friend for backup. Overall, they did not see this as a problem. They considered it just another trivial matter that needed to be wiped out on the spot. But they couldn't even imagine, as soon as this small fry got stuck in the fight with a fierce charge, he would kill 2 of their comrades. At that very moment, another enemy rushed straight at the hero with a furious scream, but he didn't even manage to do anything. He fell lifeless to the ground, heavily stained with blood. This murder was committed by the same boy whom Bu Yun-sol had engaged in battle to save him from inevitable death. But the hand was half severed, the wounds too deep were bleeding profusely. The dying man gathered his last strength to deliver a final blow to his executioner. And then, losing consciousness from blood loss, he died with a smile on his lips, pleased that he managed to complete his revenge, even at the cost of his own life. At that very moment, Kim Ch-Hall-en noticed Bu Yun-sol had finally finished the fight, dealing with everyone. He enthusiastically began to praise his friend's incredible skills, patiently waiting for him to release the sword from his hands and relax. And at that very moment, armed with a weapon resembling a large needle, he decided to stab the boy so that he would no longer relax, even despite his high level of martial arts. But in the end, the traitor couldn't do anything. The young man didn't even have a blade in his hands. He swiftly picked it up from the ground and immediately made a flawless block. Only after that did the enraged hero rush to attack Kim Ch-Hall-en, realizing that because of this vile scoundrel, he still couldn't ask the deceased his last question about revenge. Of course, for Kim Ch-Hall-en, the hero's reason for rage seemed ridiculous and completely senseless. Moreover, the traitor wanted to know, when did Bu Yun-sol realize that he was going to kill him treacherously? But for the hero, everything was clear from the start. Last time, when they were hiding underground together, he perfectly understood the boy had a whole bunch of weapons prepared. It was impossible not to notice, given his restrained movements. The body betrayed that the boy was trying to hide something at waist level. The only reason Bu Yun-sol did not expose him immediately, even knowing the truth, was that interest in the methods this young trickster used. And the experienced warrior decided, watching someone trying to deceive him would be very useful for future battles. And of course, Kim Ch-Hall-en got angry at such impudence. He was sure he had played his role flawlessly. In the end, the youth launched an attack, but none of his hidden blades managed even to scratch the enemy. And then Kim Ch-Hall-en finally began to understand what he had felt toward this boy all along. The opponent seemed to anticipate every move he made. That's the truth, the young assassin was very close. In the end, with one attack, the hero hit the boy in the shoulder and scarlet blood immediately flowed from his body. Bu Yun-sol himself, seizing the moment, picked up the hidden weapon from the ground to examine the needles more closely. Even if the weapon was skillfully assembled, it became completely powerless as soon as the person being targeted knew about the hidden arsenal. And of course, as soon as these words were spoken, the enraged boy rushed at the hero, ready to erase him from the world, even at the cost of his own life. And in the end, it all ended with his own death and without any unnecessary difficulties. The master said goodbye to this enemy by inflicting numerous wounds with his blade. With a lightning-fast movement, he sheathed the sword, and at that very moment, the opponent's body, already lifeless, fell to the ground. Only after this did the hero manage to look more closely at the hidden weapon and realized, if he had not noticed it earlier, he could have faced serious problems up to fatal wounds and defeat. The most upsetting thing in this situation was something else. He saw in Kim Ch-Hall-en's eyes a spark of life fading away. The young man was clearly one of those who desire to live. Yet Kim Ch-Hall-en was very different from the guy the hero had saved. In the last moments of his life, he was indeed going to ask, what does a person feel when they complete their revenge? And he also wanted to know whether after avenging his grandfather, he could leave life just as calmly, with a smile on his face. In the end, Bu Yun-sol decided to take the sword of the fallen boy as a reminder of this moment and moved on. He did not suspect that all this time he was being closely watched from the shadows. The same pursuers noticed. The young man used a basic sword technique of the Hua sect, which is hardly respected in real combat and is not even capable of killing an assassin. So despite the observers considering him quite impressive, Among the recruits there were others with a talent level similar to his. Therefore, if the hero does not raise his level, it will be incredibly difficult for him to survive in hell. This is exactly how the hero's trials continued. And the next day he was already fleeing on the edge of his strength from the pursuit. Dozens of the tested did not fall behind and did not let Bu Yun Sol escape so that he would not have time to kill him. They rained attacks on him with various weapons, and the hero so far managed to successfully dodge every enemy strike. Yet the boy with the metal whip still managed to catch him. The blow landed on his back. And this trio stubbornly did not fall behind. Bu Yun Sol understood if he kept just running, he would soon run out of breath, so he needed to immediately come up with a plan. At that moment, at the highest point of the island, the Golden Blade was standing, carefully watching everything that was happening, together with his assistant Jin Gak. He decided to find out what the situation was among the tested, and it turned out of 86 people, only 41 remained alive. Only 3 days had passed by that moment, so the Golden Dagger was even surprised for a moment that more than half of the tested had died. So only the most capable specimens probably remained in the exam, and he wants to see how their skills will manifest. After which he immediately demanded that his subordinate give him the map that he had kept with him all this time. At that moment, the hero was still fighting, delivering several sharp blows to the opponents. And although in the end he was left without his sword, he still managed to confuse the enemies and escape again. Judging by the characteristics of their weapons, it was obvious. Fighting in open terrain was a complete disadvantage for him. So at first he decided to enter an area where the space was much narrower, so that the opponents would be right in front of him. His gaze fell on the Hua Battle Hall, where he had ordered the ghosts to be released. The hero rushed into the hall, but soon the pursuers caught up with him. The enemies prowled the corridors, trying to find out where Bu Yun Sol had gone, and even mocked him, saying he was a rat hiding in the corners. One of the leaders warned, no matter how much the fugitive ran, he would die anyway, so he suggested he come out of hiding. He had no idea that the boy was already standing behind him because the warrior actually was not going to hide. But unfortunately, the enemy managed to slip away from the unexpected attack, and he also mocked the hero, saying that such pathetic tricks would never corner him. He threw aside towards the hero his thrown secret weapon from every attack of which the hero easily dodged. Of course, the boy went mad from the fact that the hero read all his moves, but he was not allowed to get angry. The hero instantly cut his throat with a sword. As soon as this happened, he rushed at others who were using long metal whips for the attack. As soon as they launched the attack, but unfortunately, they turned out to be too slow, so one of them again lost a hand. Only then did the gathered group of survivors finally realize this guy had deliberately lured them here. After all, in a confined space, the formation of the White Horse's squad lost its strength, their power sharply declined, and the direction and options of techniques became easily predictable. Moreover, each of the guys individually was not a real threat, so he decided to deal with them one by one. The narrow corridor passage allowed this. But unfortunately, the next attack still hit him. The whip bounced off the wall and struck the young man in the stomach. Probably while he was lying on the ground, the others decided that this was the perfect chance to escape and rushed to the exit. But they ran into a warrior who was guarding this exit. He warned the guys that they shouldn't even try to run because it would be a disgrace for the followers of the demonic path. This was the leader who trained these guys, so they stepped forward and said essentially, they wanted to get out of here because fighting in the martial arts hall would simply be inconvenient. But as soon as he heard those words, the leader personally interrupted them all and instantly realized that he shouldn't have taken weaklings under his wing who hadn't even reached an advanced level. At that moment, the hero stepped out from cover and immediately understood. This man was truly the leader of those guys. And he honestly admitted that he was terribly impressed by Bu Yun Sol's skills, and that he had previously seen the techniques he used. These were techniques of the Hua sect. As soon as he said this, he smiled, introduced himself to the young man, and began asking what the hero's name was. But Bu Yun Sol could not understand why this man took it upon himself to kill his own students. He only laughed contemptuously at such nonsense, confident that he did not need to know the name of the one who was about to die. Then he suddenly grabbed a lasso and lunged at the young man, and in doing so broke the weapon the boy had been holding all this time. The leader smiled and explained. He supposedly heard that at the advanced level of the Hua halls, boys are taught only one sword technique and a defensive one at that. But Bu Yun Sol wanted to know how the man knew this. Could he have some network of informants that the hero had no idea about? And obviously, the leader noticed. The young man was lost in thought right in the middle of their fight. But as soon as this happened, he charged again and smashed everything in his path, whether wall or person, whatever he could reach. With this man, there was really no advantage in fighting indoors. The hero had fewer maneuvers left to dodge the blows. Finally, the hero managed to parry another attack and grip the blade more firmly, ready to continue the clash. But the leader realized with disappointment, the boy's disgusting sword technique could in no way withstand the power of the white horse with 9 tails style. Immediately after this, his whip scattered seriously in different directions, weaving strikes into the space and wrapping the enemy in chaos. He laughed incessantly, fully aware that in a moment the white horse whip would take this boy's life. The hero tried to read the opponent's attack but still came to the conclusion. The defensive style, which he had honed at an advanced level in the Hua halls, was unable to stop these strikes. He didn't even have enough strength to break the foal's whip. But at that very moment, he recalled what he had been taught in the initial lessons, especially in the middle hall. So far, the whip was already twisting from all sides, and the leader noticed. The boy was not giving up, struggling to the last, trying to break free from this iron prison. Of course, he tried to explain to the boy that his pathetic technique would change nothing. But very quickly, the young man managed to break this ring and escape from the captivity of the iron whip. As soon as he was free, he immediately rushed at the opponent, using the middle hall technique, Extreme Lightning Strike. The man could not understand until the end that the enemy was mortally wounded by this technique. Moreover, due to the scale of the cut wound, he did not feel pain at all. Shock dulled everything. But very soon, exhausted from blood loss, he fainted on the cold ground, and Bu Yun Sol finally managed to exhale and regain consciousness. As the middle hall instructor told the boy, his sword technique was truly a dangerous style, and at the same time the most powerful attack he was currently capable of. However, it was obvious, using it again would not be easy. He was incredibly lucky to have mastered this technique precisely in the middle hall. But he had already spent too much time. The limited zone was about to change, so he needed to move. In the next moment, Bu Yun Sol felt a wave of ominous energy rolling over him from behind, dense, pressing, like a shroud of death. It was a ghost guardian. It appeared to close another forbidden zone and eliminate the disobedient students who dared to linger here. It turned out that during their clash, this place became forbidden territory, but he did not come to flee the battle and cling to life at any cost, so everything must be resolved. With this thought, the hero decisively stepped forward towards the ghost, but there was no reaction. The guardian stood motionless like a statue. Then Bu Yun Sol realized his chance. He just needed to slip past, taking advantage of this silence. He dashed to the exit, bypassing the ghost from the side. No sooner had the youth seen the figure of the guardian than he immediately received a blow of such monstrous force that his whole body was instantly shackled by invisible chains. He did not even have time to turn to defend himself. The blade was already drawing a deadly arc right at the level of his neck. At the last moment before inevitable death, his animal instincts drowned out reason. Yun Sol ducked, contorting to pure animal sense, and saved himself, sacrificing only a lock of hair cut by the invisible blade. But the most frightening thing was something else. He did not even understand how exactly the ghost struck. If he had not had the beast's path, death would have come instantly, and there would have been no time even for a final thought. There was no choice left. Bu Yun Sol turned to face the enemy and decided to keep every move under close watch. Too late, he realized his mistake. The outward calmness, like that of a ghost, was a trap. And as soon as the youth stepped beyond the forbidden zone, the guardian attacked lightning fast. The master saw instructions flashed in his memory. When predators hunt herbivores, they do not always win by speed alone. The prey knows how to run in zigzags, making it harder to catch. Yet that wonderful beast invariably finds success in hunting. The secret is that the predator calculates the attack so that it coincides exactly with the moment of the victim's movement, and its own maneuver turns into a trap. Bu Yun Sol learned this lesson. He darted to the side, trying to move as unpredictably as possible. At first, he went with deceptive zigzags, but the ghost immediately blocked his way, standing like an impenetrable wall. Without wasting time, the young man dodged the strike with a somersault, bounced back, and activated the power of the beast's path. Now it remained only to force the enemy to reveal himself with one unexpected move. But the latter already realized he was late. The phantom plunged the tip of his sword into his throat. Yet at the last moment, the guard froze and sheathed his blade. Bu Yun Sol still managed to jump beyond the forbidden zone. In the end, he had only one option left: to run. If he had faced such an enemy face to face in open terrain, he would have been unable to oppose anything. Bu In-sol could say with confidence, this ghost was a true master of the highest level. Therefore, his own skill next to such a one was small, like a drop before the ocean. Only when the sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky with crimson reflections, did Bu In-sol finally stop, exhaled, and gave himself time to reflect on the encounter with the ghost. He saw with his own eyes the skill of true masters, an incomparable, unattainable level. So the monster that killed his grandfather probably had the same terrible fighting power. To defeat such an enemy, the hero had to surpass himself more than once and twice. While the young man was catching his breath, he did not even notice how another warrior settled nearby, calmly sitting on a stone and howling as he washed his bloodied sword. He quickly realized Bu In-sol is him. He had been sought for a long time. He had heard about this boy. They say he managed to master the legendary beast's path. The hero himself was struck by how familiarly the stranger spoke to him, as if they were old friends. Apparently, this warrior also moved in the information network like that guy with the whip who was killed by his own leader. The young man stood up for a moment. He was about to introduce himself, but changed his mind just in time. He saw no point in naming himself before the warrior he was about to kill. A dead man does not need to know the name of his executioner. Immediately after this, he launched an attack, but Bu In-sol did not even flinch. He easily dodged, reading the trajectory of the enemy's blade. Honestly, the young man was stunned. Thanks to beastly instincts, the opponent anticipated the sword's movements moment by moment and could very well become one of the candidates for the position of master of the demonic sect. But this was just another reason to get rid of this dangerous seed right here and now. He continued the fight, but the technique of his sword changed drastically. But In-sol to the very end could not understand what exactly the opponent meant when he spoke about the seed of the demonic sect. Here he recalled the words of O So-jin Hwi supposedly, not everyone gathered here aspires to become demonic masters. So this guy turned out to be a spy of orthodox sects, and it was impossible to get distracted from the fight. Suddenly Bu In-sol felt a strange power, as if it began to suck energy from his body. A childhood memory surfaced how he, together with his grandfather, examined the corpse of a man killed by a blade of the Hebei style. Grandfather immediately understood what technique it was. There were no external wounds on the body, but all the bones inside were shattered. It was the true hallmark of that school. Internal energy seeped into the victim's body with every touch of the blade. The old man became curious about what exactly that man had sinned for, that even a master of the Peng clan, warriors rarely seen in the world of martial arts, paid attention to him. Briefly putting two and two together, Bu In-sol realized his opponent belonged to the Hebei Peng clan. The enemy was even surprised by such insight and wanted to know how the boy managed to expose him. But Bu In-sol recalled another recognizable trait of this clan, a powerful absorption technique, one of the fundamental techniques of internal power. The method was insidious. It seemed to pull the user closer to the enemy, but this double-edged stick could also strike the attacker. He remembered everything his grandfather taught him and raised his sword against the opponent. The enemy had nowhere left to hide. He properly named himself and promised that the Peng clan would destroy all the seeds of the demonic sect. And then the most incredible thing happened next. Just as he was about to launch an attack, Bu In-sol suddenly plunged his blade straight into the ground. Immediately after that, Bu In-sol dodged the strike, and the opponent, carried by momentum, chopped at the sword stuck in the earth. Taking advantage of this, Bu In-sol attacked with a kick to the side, then snatched the sword from the ground. The young man looked at the opponent, who had hunched over and pressed his palm to his ribs, and immediately understood. The plan worked. The warrior of the orthodox sect staggered with rage. The demonic degenerate was resorting to dirty tricks again. Bu In-sol himself realized this soberly. The plan worked, but the effect was not very powerful. No wonder the enemy's body had probably undergone years of training, so he had already found a way to minimize the damage. The hero recalled the advanced hall instructor's advice about the late strike technique. At the moment of collision, the whole point of speed was to be at least a fraction of a second faster than the enemy. Now, by turning the absorption technique upside down, it was possible to strike even faster. Instead of fighting against the force pulling, the sword had to be directed straight at the opponent, just slightly shifting the trajectory at the last moment. The enemy barely managed to raise his defense, otherwise the sword would have pierced his head, blinding him in one eye. At that very moment, the frightened Orthodox student finally realized Bu Yun-sol had used the absorption technique against himself. But in the end, the absorption technique of the Hebei sect was so powerful that it even attracted stones from afar. Even the most skilled fighters would hardly be able to reasonably resist this power. The warrior was sure the boy would not be able to stop him. He charged forward again. It was all in vain. The more powerful the absorption technique became, the faster and deadlier Bu Yun-sol's sword began to cut. The hero dodged the blows again and again and intercepted them with counterattacks. The opponent was raging madly. How many more times was this boy going to pull off his worthless tricks? He launched a full-strength attack, considering himself strong enough and having no special techniques, exactly what Bu Yun-sol was waiting for. The time had come to bring out the first technique of the Hua sword, the Deep Mystic Blade technique. The enemies clashed in the final battle, and each unleashed their best technique in the duel. At first glance, only Bu Yun-sol appeared wounded. Bloody streaks were already visible on his body. The whole matter was different. The opponent had already received a mortal wound. He just needed more time to finally realize it. He fell to his knees and only then understood he had lost. Bu Yun-sol hurried to explain. The Hua sword technique was too risky a plan. He had to endure the enemy's barrage of strikes himself. Orthodox warrior had no idea that someone could interpret Hua's sword like that. And then the unexpected happened. Bu Yun-sol left him alive and simply walked away, deciding that this guy had nothing to do with his revenge. The Orthodox master was stunned. In all his life he had met many fighters, but nothing like this, something so intriguingly unpredictable, had never happened to him before. He could only hope that they would not cross paths with Bu Yun-sol again. Such an opponent was especially dangerous. As soon as the hero disappeared from sight, a phantom crept up to the wounded warrior, the one who came to kill him. The guardian was torn by pity. The guy from the Orthodox sect, a member of the Hebei Peng clan, despite all his strength in battle, turned out to be almost helpless. Only at the last moment did the dying warrior realize the truth. The phantoms had known who he was from the very beginning and still allowed him to pass the selection. So he greatly underestimated the demonic palace and paid for it with his life. Meanwhile, at Oso Jinhee things were no better. Hiding behind a tree, he was pulling out numerous needles from his own body. Honestly, the guy could not even imagine that among the participants there would be someone so virtuoso in handling poisons. The next moment the opponents spotted him. They only pitied the guy who was hit by a special needle of the hellish bloody fortress. The poison was so cruel that without an antidote the victim would sooner or later die in terrible agony. Then Oso Jinhee fully realized, even if you are a loner, there are moments when it is much better to have a partner. At that very moment, the girl with icy composure stopped the unsuccessful fighter. No matter how skilled a warrior he was and what incredible skills he had mastered, fighting with a sword using only the left hand against a crowd was completely pointless. The surviving left limb simply would not allow him to cope with the pressure. So the only reasonable decision now was to surrender meekly and allow himself to be killed without unnecessary suffering. As soon as those cold, ice-like words sounded, a whole crowd of merciless killers rushed at the defenseless man, showering him with a hail of throwing needles, shurikens, and everything else at hand, fueling a bloody frenzy. Even despite the incredible miracle by which the warrior fended off the barrage of merciless attacks, the poison needle still pierced his arm, just tearing the flesh, piercing through the body. This fatal hit meant only one thing. If he did not immediately take the life-saving antidote, he would soon pay for his carelessness with his own life, writhing in painful convulsions from the poison's effect. But just as the unfortunate man resigned himself to the thought of inevitable death, suddenly a piercing scream of pain was heard, not his own. At that very moment, one of the attackers fell to the ground, dead, meaning someone from the ambush was striking the bandits with lightning precision. And of course, this mysterious savior turned out to be none other than the hero who came to defend his acquaintance, so Jinhee did not abandon him in trouble. In the end, the brief, fierce fight ended with stunning speed. All who dared to attack the traveler, the scoundrels, instantly paid for their audacity with their worthless lives under the Avenger's blade. At that moment, the terrified-to-death fighter abruptly dropped the sword from his trembling hands and began explaining to the hero that he had no intention of harming him. It was a terrible mistake. But the savior had no intention of paying attention to his pitiful excuses. Instead, the warrior began thoroughly searching the bodies of the fallen enemies. Finally, among the corpses, he found the cherished bottle with the precious antidote hidden inside. Thanks to this find, the hero could now deal much more easily and effectively with the remaining scoundrels of the hellish bloody sect without fearing their insidious poisons. When the warrior was already about to leave without looking back, So Jin-ha, mortally frightened, jumped up and desperately stopped him. He explained in a trembling voice that the warrior had been struck by a deadly poisonous venom. And Bu Yun-sol, with a stone face, quickly intervened and began to explain to the young man, he came here not at all to save anyone. His goal is to exterminate all who remain, including So Jin-ha himself. And if he has not yet finished off that unfortunate one, it is only because he considered it pointless. He simply saw no benefit. And the young man himself, deep inside, perfectly understood this. The hero was not just right, his words were just. Even if the warrior of mercy gave him the life-saving antidote, So Jin-ha was still ultimately doomed. However, in the hopeless situation, the young man had another, more tempting path to escape death. He proposed to Bu Yun-sol to become his ally, let him generously give the antidote and allow him to survive. However, the boy still saw no compelling reason, so why would such an alliance be beneficial to him at all? Then the dying man hastened to lay out the logic of his phrase. About 20 survivors remained, and besides the two of them, all other groups had already united into clans. No matter how incredibly strong a warrior the hero was, alone against countless ruthless enemies, he could not hold out long. Numerical superiority would sooner or later crush him. And if he agrees to work together with So Jin-ha, who knows all the skills and weaknesses of the opponents, he will definitely be able to gain an advantage in future battles. The warrior solemnly swore, if the savior preserves his life, he will never betray him in the whole world. And indeed, from everything Bu Yun-sol remembered about this guy from past encounters, he gave the impression of a somewhat proud and independent warrior, by no means a treacherous traitor just waiting to stab him in the back. The terms of the agreement were extremely simple and clear. Until only two remain in this bloody tournament, they fight side by side and do not direct deadly blades at each other. Weighing the benefits of this unusual alliance, the hero made a fateful decision and handed the boy the life-saving antidote. So Jin-ha immediately began pouring valuable potion on the wounded arm to expel the poison from the body as quickly as possible before it was too late. But suddenly, the hero caught a painfully familiar ominous sound from afar. Another cursed forbidden zone appeared in this arena of death. The warrior rushed forward, urging the slow So Jin-ha, get out of here immediately, away from this doomed place without wasting a single precious moment. But he in a hurry could not understand why there was such sudden panic. After all, this zone was still formally not prohibited. And the hero briefly explained a simple logic. If most zones are already sealed and suddenly another forbidden patch appears here, it means that very soon all the living who remain will gather right here. Escaping unnoticed was no longer destined for them. The huge, bloodthirsty crowd had managed to surround these two with a tight, impenetrable ring of bodies and blades. Now escape was hopelessly late. The trap had snapped shut. And yet, among all the enemies gathered around, one unusual boy immediately caught the young man's eye, clearly not like the rest of the mediocre fighters. Ultimately, the two enemy groups that had converged in a wedge saw no point in waiting for someone to attack first and thus give up the initiative, so one of the leaders suggested, first finish off the two wounded and defenseless. They knew well about the sinister reputation of Bu Yun-sol and had heard about him more than once, the young man who mastered the beast path from the Nyangya pavilion. And it was known about So Jin-ha, his fencing was quite good. Moreover, the trickster carefully studied the combat skills of other students, snooping around in search of weak spots. So underestimating this pair is a fatal mistake. And it was obvious these two stubbornly until the very end did not join any groups. They remained proud loners. Therefore, the enemies simply gathered everyone against them, forming a temporary alliance. At this tense moment, So Jin-ha, with unshakable calm, showed the hero the bottle tied to his hand. In this modest container lay a powdered antidote. Just recently, he had generously given it to the boy so that he could be saved. But the guy acted preemptively. He passed off the contents as the deadly poison of the bloody sect and sharply threw the powder right into the faces of the nearest enemies who suspected nothing. Of course, all those who attacked here immediately panicked. Covering their faces with their hands, they were firmly convinced that the legendary poisonous gas of the cursed bloody sect was in the air. Meanwhile, in the confusion, Bu Yun-sol together with the clever So Jin-ha miraculously managed to break out of the deadly encirclement, taking advantage of the chaos. Unfortunately, the most perceptive of those being pursued quickly realized there was no poison in the air at all. They had been brazenly deceived. However, So Jin-ha was still incredibly glad about this turn of events because the innocent powder managed to create a perfect smoke screen to break away from the chase and disappear into the chaos. Moreover, the open spacious area was currently completely unsuitable for them tactically. They urgently needed to hide somewhere in the mountains, among winding paths and secret caves. The hero thought exactly the same. It was necessary to find a cave that would play to their advantage in defense. The warrior knew one truly good position, a shelter with a narrow, easy-to-defend entrance but inside incredibly spacious, ideal for holding a defense. The cave that Bu Yun Saw confidently chose greatly confused So Jin-ha with its thoughtfulness, as if the hero had been seriously preparing for the trial from the very beginning and had calculated all the options. So the legendary technique of the wild beast was by no means the last deadly trump card up his sleeve. That is why the guy was so eager to find out who really is the mysterious Bu Yun Saw who hides so many secrets. But their misfortune knew no bounds. As soon as they finally reached the longed-for cave, a terrifying black haze appeared before the surprised fugitives. From the swirling veil, ghosts began to emerge one after another, the very ones that had been scattered across the entire territory until now. It turns out the cave zone became forbidden. The area was sealed. This also definitely meant one thing. From the very beginning, the incorporeal guards had been closely watching their every step. They deliberately made that cave a forbidden territory just when they saw those fugitives rushed here to seek shelter, hence a real trap. But fortunately, as long as they have not crossed the fatal boundary of the mystical fog, the ghosts will not attack them. That is what the trial rules dictate. And since they will have to fight the pursuers to the death anyway, Bu Yun Saw rightly reasoned, this territory is by no means the worst place for the decisive battle. After all, behind their backs stretched a forbidden zone inhabited by ghosts. So it turned out that they were fighting as if in a cramped cave with a tightly closed exit. The enemies could only attack from the front. In the end, the cornered youths left themselves no choice. They drew their faithful swords and prepared to meet fully armed those who dared to come for their heads. But very soon those who thirst for blood, the enemies, finally gathered together. They lined up in a threatening formation in front of the two cornered but unbroken fighters. The warriors were filled with firm, steel determination to fight to the end. They knew perfectly well, as long as their backs are covered by ghosts, if even one enemy carelessly crosses the fog boundary, he will be instantly and mercilessly destroyed. The overconfident crowd seemed not to think about such danger, at least not until in the heat of bloodthirsty excitement. So the attackers only contemptuously mocked the miserable bugs who were senselessly dragging their inevitable death. After that, the enraged horde rushed at them with war cries, and at that very moment, detached and attentive, the overseer with the golden dagger watched over all this bloody meat grinder. Here, the final battle of the tournament was unfolding, the very one that was to weed out and determine the 10 most worthy winners of this bloody slaughter. The enemies threw absolutely everything into the fight, throwing weapons, insidious poisons, and everything that came to hand in a desperate attempt to break the defenders. But so far none of the boys was seriously wounded. They fought like lions. Now that So Jin-ha was no longer poisoned by the cursed blood sex venom, he felt much freer. He loosened up right in the heat of the clash, easily slipping away from attacks and with precisely honed skill destroying enemies one by one. Soon these two restless warriors, having dealt with another bunch of unlucky opponents, finally stood side by side, back to back, holding the line. But there were still too many enemies thirsty for their blood. The horde did not thin even for a moment. And So Jin-ha was already completely exhausted. His breathing faltered, broke, and the fighter felt the inevitable. Here he seemed to be dying, falling in battle. However, after those doomed words of his comrade Bu Yun Saw, the dearest face suddenly flashed in his memory, his beloved grandfather, who was fading away with a peaceful smile on his lips, unafraid of the end. This torment, flare after flare, ignited in the young man an uncontrollable thirst for life. He clearly understood he could not die here until he avenged. Eventually, the warrior seemed to go mad. He fiercely rushed into attack and wildly cut down every enemy who dared to approach him within striking distance. Finally, everyone around realized how deadly dangerous this obsessed enemy was in his madness, so all the Alliance forces immediately rushed to destroy him at any cost, before it was too late. At that moment, the guy calmly placed his palm on the sword hilt. He sharpened his senses to the limit and moved as his infallible beastly instinct guided him, shutting off reason. Suddenly, the wise words of his mentor came to mind like a hint for the boy. He had already mastered the legendary art of swordsmanship, available only to the chosen. The young man applied this ancient art at the decisive moment. With one lightning-fast strike, he laid down 4 fierce fighters who had attacked him at once. But unfortunately, he got too carried away and drifted into thoughts about technique, carelessly letting the enemy get too close, the one who attacked with bare hands, unarmed. His inhuman strength turned out to be so great and devastating that the sword, under the terrible blow of the iron fist, pitifully cracked along the entire length of the blade, and the hero was thrown far back by an explosive wave of monstrous energy. Of course, so Jin-ha immediately panicked, fearing for the life of his fearless comrade with whom he had fought side by side. But still, the enemies only mockingly laughed at this touching fright, solemnly believing Bu-in-sol was probably already dead. And only then did the boy finally understand the true reason for his comrade's panicked terror. He was thrown straight into the very heart of the forbidden zone, beyond the fog that brings death. At that fateful moment, the Phantom Guardian had already materialized right above him and prepared his ghostly sword to behead the insolent boy with one strike. But not allowing this unjust punishment, the overseer shouted loudly, calling the attention of everyone present. As if on signal protecting his promising student, Master Saw appeared. He blocked the Phantom's path to the victim and prevented the Guardian from killing the talented youth. Immediately after this stunning rescue, the frightened boy nearly died of fright. From shock, his strength gave out, and he fainted and fell to the ground. The overseer immediately drew a dagger and rushed to him headlong, authoritatively ordering to bring a flawless doctor at once. Before the boy finally gave up the ghost, there could be no delay even for a moment. He was completely indifferent to the fact that he had unilaterally stopped the sacred third trial and broken the ancient order. He solemnly promised to take full responsibility for such a daring decision before the superiors. After all, he had finally found a true priceless treasure, a warrior with lightning-fast predator reflexes, an insatiable thirst to win, and an absolutely unwavering heart of a true fighter. Bu-in-sol was an uncut diamond of rare purity, who simply had no significant flaws, a true genius by nature, worthy to become the supreme holy demon. Soon a gray-haired old man appeared to confess and went to report to the authorities about his unauthorized actions. The leadership was extremely intrigued. Why did the Golden Dagger so boldly disobey direct orders? The number of candidates to enter the Demon School top 10 was exactly 10 chosen ones. And according to the Pavilion Chief's plan, 2 more were to flawlessly serve as the ears and eyes of the Holy Demon, so there were supposed to be exactly 12 contenders. Yet the Golden Dagger brazenly stopped the trial, although there were still 2 extra contenders. Obviously, severe punishment for such an unauthorized act would inevitably come, but the man was already mentally prepared for any consequences. Also, the elder was extremely anxious before the arrival of the powerful envoys from the 10 demon schools. He had no idea how they would react to such a blatant violation of ancient rules. But the old man understood this perfectly. The eyes of the 10 demon schools were as vigilant as his own, so they would undoubtedly comprehend everything. As soon as the bloody trial ended, the hero finally regained consciousness. But he woke up in a completely unfamiliar room. A sharp scent of healing herbs and medicines hung in the air. Apparently, he was brought to a place where the wounded participants of the tournament were carefully cared for. Moreover, all the wounds on his mutilated body miraculously disappeared, healed without a trace. And not only the external injuries, but even the internal traumas left after exhausting training. This definitely meant the doctors from the Demon Path were much more skilled healers than Bu-in-sol had expected from them. Changing into clean clothes, he left the chambers to find at least one living man. As soon as he stepped forward, he immediately encountered a friendly servant. He politely greeted the young master and offered to escort him. But as soon as the hero found himself in a spacious hall, his gaze fell upon a dozen students. Right now, they were carelessly feasting in the dining room and devouring incredibly delicious dishes heartily. Next, he decided to ask the servant where exactly they were. The answer sounded as if it were some secret. This mysterious place was called the Heart of Hell. So Bu-in-sol had never been here before, at least not during all his territory explorations. The servant himself respectfully asked the young master to order any dish. He could prepare absolutely anything the guest desired. But the modest Bu-in-sol asked to bring only 2 bowls of noodles. He ordered 2 portions because he and his grandfather always ate noodles, and the second bowl was just for his grandfather out of old memory. At that moment, So Jin-ha joined the hero at the table and decided. The boy was a true noodle connoisseur since he immediately ordered 2 heavy bowls. After that, he fell silent for a moment, then thanked Bu Yun-sol for saving his life. If the warrior had not taken part in that last battle, So Jin-ha would probably have turned into a wandering spirit roaming through the clouds in the world of the dead. However, Bu Yun-sol had no idea what kind of salvation was meant. He had simply finished off the enemy who crossed his path. So Jin-ha had to patiently explain everything. After the 3rd trial, there were supposed to be exactly 12 people left. But the chief instructor arbitrarily ended the sacred trial to save the hero, and in the end, there were as many as 14 survivors. Therefore, So Jin-ha truly survived thanks to the hero and sincerely wanted to thank him, and he was also quite surprised that Bu Yun-sol really knew nothing about what had happened. Although this is not surprising at all, the boy fainted almost instantly. 4 long days had passed since the completion of the trial, and the hero still could not come to his senses. But they were incredibly lucky. In the heart of hell was a flawless doctor who is also called a mad healer. Once he was known as a man with a divine hand and the greatest doctor in all lands, but when he could not cure his beloved's illness, he went mad with grief. Bu Yun-sol had heard of this legendary man. According to rumors, he could save anyone who was still breathing, regardless of the severity of their wounds. No wonder the warrior was now completely healthy. Perhaps if the grandfather had met this talented doctor back then, he would not have lost his precious life. After that, So Jin-ha decided to tell the hero everything he knew about those who had managed to survive. He brazenly snatched Bu Yun-sol's bowl of noodles and, despite the displeased grimace on the hero's face, slowly began to speak. And what truly impressed the warrior was something else. Those dangerous killer boys they had fought to the death were actually the elite sent by the 10 demon schools. They say demons choose successors based on their evaluation. The hero immediately understood why the martial arts skills of the contenders were stronger even than those of the instructors themselves. But Bu Yun-sol still had no idea why the golden dagger took it upon itself to save him, risking everything without exception. Even So Jin-ha himself was incredibly curious to get to the real reason. It seemed that Hek Ren-yun decided to drag the boy into the war of the 10 demons. Could his school somehow be connected to the golden dagger, or had they met before? But there could be no connection between these two, and because of this, the whole picture became even stranger. For his audacious act, the chief instructor was given a severe sentence. As soon as So Jin-ha heard this, he stepped down from his high position and returned to the path of the swordsman. Hearing this, So Jin-ha could not understand. A person completely unrelated to him dared to face harsh punishment and condemnation just to save his life. But suddenly they heard a loud bell strike. It echoed throughout the building like thunder. So Jin-ha instantly sprang up and pulled the hero along with him. It was a signal for those who still remained in hell. He explained that the supreme advisor of the 10 demon schools had arrived, the very one they were to meet with honors. Soon Master Jin Hak gathered all the students in a single line to present them to the arriving lords. But although so many people entered through the door, not a single step was heard, as if they silently glided through the air like ghosts. As soon as the masters entered, the elder immediately pointed his finger at the hero. The head of the Death Command School Division offered the boy to become the successor of their ancient school. But very soon it became clear, the old man was not addressing him at all, but the boy standing behind. He offered him to become the successor of the Death Command School. The young man explained that he had only honed sword techniques and had never trained in the art of the spear. But for the old man, it did not matter at all. He was confident that this young man was born to master the spear, the command of death. The boy trained his body, and his talent was perfectly suited for studying the spear. But if he had taken up fencing, he would never have achieved greatness even with such strong bones and stature. And he immediately pulled the young man after him to teach him from then on all the art of the spear. After this, it was time to choose another old man. And right there he appeared. This gray-haired elder was the head of the blood-hardened castle of 10,000 poisons. As soon as they heard his name, everyone shuddered with horror. This legendary master of poison could kill all living things at a distance of 3,000 meters with just a wave of his hand. And of course, the old man immediately fixed his penetrating gaze on the boy So Jin-ha and offered him to become the successor of the castle, forged in blood. The young man was stunned even, though he had been called a genius all his life. He could not understand how it was possible. They want him to join the castle that raises poisoners. At this time, the vice captain explained, the most terrible poison in the world is the venomous heart. Even before the start of the third trial, So Jin-ha cold-bloodedly tried to use the girl from the training hall to eliminate all the other students. When that didn't work, he simply killed her to cover up all the evidence. So Jin-ha tried to prove that it was not a murder. The idea was born from the very beginning of her, and she was the first to attack his life. But the deputy captain did not even accuse the boy. The fact that he could cold-bloodedly take so many lives without hesitation for his goal meant his nature was perfectly suited for the art of poison, and this caused admiration. So according to the old man, So Jin-ha could consider himself a talented swordsman, but that was not enough to look down on the world of martial arts. Only the chosen ones can shatter the world with blade and sword, and So Jin-ha's talent for poison was much stronger than for the sword. But against Bu Yun-sol, his chosenness did not look convincing at all. He said that he first started learning to wield the sword during the tournament and that his skills were not inferior to what So Jin-ha had honed for a whole 10 years. There was no choice left. He decided to join the castle, tempered by blood. As soon as everything happened, the old man immediately disappeared into the darkness, dragging his student behind him. It was time for the head of the main school. The man abruptly moved forward and carefully examined the students. This was now the greatest demonic sword of the Burning Rain clan. Everyone instantly froze and held their breath because before them was the student of the previous master of the clan, the greatest demonic sword in person. Everyone was itching to ask the question, whom was he going to choose? And many secretly prayed that the choice would fall on them. This stern gaze fixed on the boy Bu Yun-sol as if the man had already decided everything for himself. He had already heard about the hero, many elders praised him. Moreover, the young man inherited the technique of the middle hall instructor Jian. The man impatiently awaited what heights the boy would reach. After all, the martial arts of his clan were incredibly deep and required diligently honing skills. But when the hero glanced at the other masters waiting for the verdict, he said coldly and calmly, he did not want to join the Flaming Rain clan. Of course, such a brazen no shocked the man wildly. But even more it angered him that the boy dared to refuse and did not even take his offer seriously. He spread overwhelming energy around like a volcano and crushed the hero to the ground with devastating force. But the warrior calmly explained he had the right to refuse this offer. The man could not believe that someone would refuse the main school's offer for the sake of choosing another, so he decided to find out, where did he want to go? And the fact that Bu Yun-sol was going to head to the Nangya pavilion angered the leader even more. Of all the options, the leader chose the most contemptible pavilion. It was considered a true insult to the main school. Honestly, this man was so furious that it seemed his aura bent and broke the boy's entire body. No wonder he himself was the greatest demonic sword. Yet the master Saw hurriedly emerged to defend the youth standing between him and the strike, shielding with his own body. But the leader grew even angrier. Some miserable deputy of the pavilion dares to block his way. The man quickly grabbed his sword, showing readiness to draw the blade even before the demonic sword launched its attack. And then the leader realized this man boasted with confidence that friendship with the leader would become his shield. Others understood this perfectly. If the demonic sword went mad, other candidates could also be hit, they could be killed too. The conflict had to be stopped immediately. That is why the young man in green robes who arrived hurried to persuade the demonic sword to stop. Everyone was already too heated, and the situation was getting out of control. But to the question, Yun-sol answered with a question. What does Jimgen mean? He said. The monk released his hand and clarified. Had anyone taught Yun-sol to calm the mind and breathe properly? In response, the boy admitted his grandfather really taught him breathing techniques, and Jimgen asked to show this technique. Yun-sol did exactly as his grandfather instructed, relaxed his body, cleared his mind, and slowly inhaled deeply. But Jimgen was struck not so much by the execution itself as by the fact that the youth did it standing. The monk then pulled himself together and asked sternly, exactly was it this technique that Yun-sol's grandfather taught him? To this, the young man said that he first mastered this technique when he played the dead with his grandfather. Then Jimgen explained, this is not just a breathing technique, but a method of accumulating true qi in the danshin. It turned out that in Yun-sol's danshin, so much qi had already accumulated that it would last for 10 years ahead. Then the monk asked the young man the name of his grandfather, and Yun-sol answered, Butsun Yan. This name was familiar to Jimgen. In Murim, this was once the name of the strongest swordsman of the demonic path and the former vice leader of the demonic court. The monk's words threw Yunsal off his thoughts. He could not believe that his grandfather was once the very vice leader of the demonic court, because why would such a person become a simple gravedigger? But Jimgen's next words hit the young man even harder. Butsun Yan's breathing technique is a technique of the Shaolin school. It turns out that Yunsal's grandfather was a master of the traditional martial arts of Murim. And if these rumors get out, not only will Yunsal lose his position as one of the 10 successors of the demons, they will also not leave him alive. Despite this, Jimgen assured with a smirk, he trusts the young man and he does not care whether he studied traditional or demonic arts. The monk agreed to teach Yunsal in order to keep the promise given to the Nangya pavilion. However, if Yunsal teaches someone else this breathing technique, Jimgen swore he would kill him and everyone connected to him. But despite the threat, Yunsal calmly and politely bowed to his master. Such a tone pleased Jimgen, and he asked the young man, does he understand the difference between traditional and demonic chi refinement techniques? As expected, Yunsal could not answer, so Jimgen explained. The chi refinement techniques of Murim are natural ways of accumulating internal energy in the human body. The demonic path, on the other hand, uses all necessary methods, allowing the accumulation of a colossal amount of energy from the very beginning. But such methods go against nature. That is why, over time, masters of traditional Murim martial arts ultimately attain exceptional true chi. The technique that Jimgen is going to teach Yunsal goes beyond demonic martial arts. This technique is the best and most amazing of all. But the disease of greatness has its price. The price of learning it is incredible pain, from which one wants to bite their own fingers. Only those who can endure such pain will be able to obtain a body fully attuned to internal energy. Once Jimgen was a master of the Azure Dragon Temple in Yunnan, but he was falsely accused of murder and expelled, his chi sealed. During the recovery, Jimgen received help from the Nangya chamber, so he promised to give them his technique to repay the debt. First, Jimgen will test the young man, with one strike simultaneously piercing all his acupuncture points with his true chi. This way, he aims for all Yunsal's meridians to be clean for learning the technique. Usually, everything is done slowly and carefully, but Jimgen will press all points at once. Yunsal will be incredibly painful. So Jimgen suggested the young man surrender immediately, and he only rasped back that he could handle it. Then Jimgen began the test and flawlessly struck all of Yunsal's acupuncture points with his chi. But to the monk's surprise, the young man was silent and remained calm, as if feeling not pain but silence. And only when the test ended did Jimgen suddenly realize Yunsal never had polluted energy in his meridians. From this revelation, the monk suddenly choked on an unhealthy laugh, and Yunsal immediately felt something eerie. Then Jimgen smiled and promised to teach him his chi refinement technique. Since then, half a year has passed. Yunsal lived, breathed, and trained all this time on the summit of the Iron Peak. To check how well the student mastered the technique, Jimgen threw a boulder at him with all his might. The boulder shattered against the matured young man as if against a rock. Then Jimgen, with a satisfied grin, admitted, Yunsal took only about half a year to master what took him 3 years. Moreover, the student was able to dissipate the accumulated chi within himself after mastering the circulation technique. Yunsal revealed his potential and achieved significant progress in a short time, and also became much healthier. That is why today Jimgen decided to conduct the final test for his student. Yunsal had mastered only the first of the 8 levels of the circulation technique, and now had to move on to the second. But while mastering the first level, Yunsal did not feel pain. The transition to the second came with sensations as if his bones were being scraped with a blade. The problem is that as soon as someone reaches the second level of the technique, their bones and muscles instantly reach maximum efficiency. But these sharp shifts immediately begin to burn the body. Therefore, the very next moment, Jimgen rushed to the student and ordered him to discard all unnecessary thoughts and focus. Due to such sudden changes, Yunsal's body could not hold the true chi, and at this pace the boy risked serious internal injuries. So Jimgen had to infuse his own initial chi into the student's body. And it worked. The pain subsided, and Yunsal finally was able to breathe deeply. But already in a moment, the strength left Jimgen and he almost fainted. Yunsal immediately rushed to the teacher's aid and sharply asked, why did he give up his initial kai? Yet Jimgen ordered his student not to worry and then explained, he will not be able to leave the Nangya pavilion if Yunsal does not properly master the technique. And the boy understood everything. The master is strict, but in reality he is very caring. So Yunsal thanked Jimgen and solemnly swore that he would never forget what he had done for him. But as soon as the words left his lips, the monk suddenly ordered Yunsal to forget about his existence. These words again and again reminded the young man of Master Sao, who also said, "The best is to forget both affection and offense." Yunsal found it strange that both his teachers spoke about such things. However, Jimgen stated that he was only able to reach the 5th level, so if Yunsal really wants to repay him, let him achieve the 8th level of technique. Yunsal gave a vow in response, he would definitely reach it. Then Jimgen said that Yunsal no longer needed his instructions since he had already reached the 2nd level. But since Yunsal should master not the circulation technique but the basics of martial arts, he was ordered to climb the cliff on the western outskirts and train there. Yunsal was a little confused by the master's decision, but he unconditionally obeyed and, saying goodbye, asked to take care of himself. 3 months passed and the Cloud Squad returned to the Nangya Pavilion, having completed the mission. And Baekhyun led that squad, yet he was still reluctant to report to the vice chief. Soon the deputy head Danhan himself found the commander on the roof and with a smile asked why he did not go straight into the Azure Wind Pavilion. But Baekhyun answered the question with a question. Why did the deputy bring to the receiver's pavilion the one who was supposed to go to the school of the Sword of the Fiery Rain? To fend off, Danhan had to explain. It was not his plan, in fact, Yunsal decided so. He was the one who rejected the sword school's offer. Baekhyun was struck that the youth voluntarily chose their pavilion, and Danhan confessed embarrassedly. He almost had to fight with the demonic sword Vikyakin. So Baekhyun has something to be proud of. He chose their pavilion, not the school of the Sword of the Fiery Rain. However, Baekhyun said that because of this, the School of the Sword did not select any of the 10 successors, and their leader expressed frank disappointment. This was what troubled Baekhyun. The demonic palace is dangerous for the Nangya Pavilion, and they are generally treated rather unfavorably there. But at the commander's indignation, Danhan only smiled and reminded, the goal of the Nangya Pavilion is to master martial arts, not to chase political power. At those words, Baekhyun snorted irritably and declared that all this is just their ideals. But still, now Baekhyun urgently needed to meet with Yunsal. His position as one of the successors was under threat. But a month ago, Yunsal set off to the once great thief Yagaval to learn his technique, Fast Phantom. Many students who mastered it became cripples. They could not keep up with the rapid changes. But to Yagaval's great surprise, Yunsal mastered this technique and achieved mastery in just a month. After that, Yagaval left the Nangya Pavilion, finally found his successor, and passed on the movement technique to him. Now Yunsal had only one thing left to improve himself and train, and he did this around the clock. It was on one of those days that Danhan and Baekhyun found him. The deputy head was pleasantly impressed. Yunsal successfully mastered the Fast Phantom of Master Yagaval. And Baekhyun was sure that this art could not be mastered in a short time, so he decided. Yunsal had been practicing the technique since the moment he came to the Nangya Pavilion. However, Danhan explained with a smile, last month Yunsal studied the improvement technique with Master Jimgen on the Iron Spear. The words of the vice head impressed Baekhyun, so the rumors that Yunsal mastered the beast's path in 2 weeks really turned out to be true. Moreover, Master Sao gave the young man water from the star spring, and it was this that helped him early discover the transcendental nerve plexus. Ta Baekhyun still reminded the deputy, through Yunsal, the number of demon successors increased to 14 instead of 12. Because of this, all 10 demonic schools had claims against the demonic court. Danhan guessed that the heads of the schools were stunned when they were ordered to teach the 14 heirs their martial arts. The essence of the 10 demon successors is simple, to raise masters who will later kill their own mentors. That is why students are pressured with competitions. This is how the 10 successors are determined. But this time, the only son of the White Demon Temple leader, Kanmurian, died, and it was Yunsal who killed him. On top of that, the Fire Rain Sword School is raising an uproar. Their sword technique was learned by someone who is not a student of that school. Because of this, the sword demon Wihyokin insists on harsh disciplinary punishment, and Chanungwon has been removed from his position and is now imprisoned. From all this information, Danhan got a headache and tiredly asked, what exactly do they want from Yunsal? Baekhyun replied that the Fire Rain School and the White Demon Temple want to verify whether Yunsal is truly qualified enough to become one of the 10 successors. Moreover, they want to make sure that Yunsal will no longer wield a sword. Danhan immediately decided that this was complete nonsense. Yunsal is already a student of the Nangya Pavilion, so demanding that he not use a sword is simply ridiculous. And it was then that Danhan noticed Yunsal is looking in their direction. And the next moment the young man rushed forward to the vice leader with Baekhyun. Danhan introduced him to the head of the Cloud Squad and sincerely praised him for his success in mastering the technique. But just as Baekhyun was about to speak to the young man, Danhan immediately interrupted him. Then Yunsal firmly stated, if something bad happens to anyone because of him, he will take full responsibility. Danhan realized that the young man heard everything, so Yunsal apologized and explained that he used the Eye of the Beast's Path technique. Baekhyun was again surprised by what he heard. It turns out the boy used two techniques at once. Thanks to the Swift Phantom technique, Yunsal was able to stand on the water surface, and with the Eyes of the Mind technique, he felt the vibrations of the water surface. Baekhyun's skepticism was dispelled after this, and he asked the deputy leader, why not believe in such a genius? This question shocked Danhan, and he recalled, the demonic palace came not just to test Yunsal to want to kill him. But Baekhyun explained, the goal of the demonic palace is to help the abbot of the White Demon Temple restore his strength, and in fact no one intends to kill the young man. Moreover, if the vice president refuses the demonic court, it will cause problems for the Nangya Pavilion, but Danhan was still against it. Then Yunsal took the floor and declared that he would go to the demonic palace. Danhan was about to object, but Yunsal reminded him, the demonic palace only seeks to improve its image, and if they kill him, they will only harm themselves. And most importantly, as a disciple of the Nangya Pavilion, Yunsal was not going to avoid fights that happened on his path. Baekhyun agreed with the young man and added that they should take advantage of this chance so that in the future the Nangya Pavilion would no longer be disturbed. Only after this did Danhan finally allow Yunsal to take the trial, but set one condition. If Yunsal truly passes the exam, he will have to make the White Demon Temple and the Fire Rain School forgive what happened. Hearing this, Yunsal swore an oath, and the next day already arrived at the gates of the demonic court. When Yunsal first came here, he knew nothing about martial arts at all. Now he had to return to the demonic palace as the heir of the Nangya Pavilion. The guard accompanying him explained, this all-encompassing pavilion is called the brain of the demonic court. The place is responsible for administration and planning, and it is equivalent to the pavilion of the chief strategist in the Muram Alliance. It is here that Yunsal will learn about the trial he must undergo. In the office, the head of the all-encompassing pavilion, Baek Chung-shin, was already waiting for him together with the secretary. After all the greetings and courtesies, Chung-shin did not beat around the bush. He directly stated that the demonic palace could not ignore the request of all 10 demonic schools. The words of the head slightly surprised Yunsal, so he clarified, could it be that the demonic palace and the 10 schools are not the same thing? Then Chung-shin had to explain to the boy that the demonic palace is an association of all the schools of the demonic path, created together with the 10 demon schools. These two concepts cannot be separated, but they also cannot be called completely identical. Usually, someone from the 10 schools later becomes the head of the demonic court, but the reverse, unfortunately for the former head, does not work. And then Yunsal realized the schools and the demonic palace simply cooperate, so there are many schools of the demonic path that do not like this. Meanwhile, Chung-shin continued and explained, the 10 successors of the demons were needed only to raise warriors capable of destroying the masters of Muram. In other words, the tournament of the 10 successors was the idea of the demonic court, to wipe out the higher ranks of the Muram Alliance from the face of the earth. At first, none of the 10 schools agreed with this idea, until one day they still sent their students. It was during the last tournament of the 10 descendants that these people met their death because of Yunsal. So Chung-shin asked the young man a question. Does he understand that the demonic palace wants to punish him, and even under the guise of a trial? But in response, Yunsal firmly said that he understood everything and was ready to undergo any trial. Chanchan was satisfied and finally decided to get down to business because the conversation had dragged on. The Fire Rain School and the White Demon Temple did Yunsal a favor. They allowed him to enter the pavilion of 10,000 demonic truths. Then Chanchan handed Yunsal a golden plate that would open the way to the first of the 3 floors of the archive. And even on one floor, there are already 25,000 books on martial arts. It was beneficial for them to give Yunsal a great advantage, but in reality, the favor was done with one purpose, so that other schools would not start speaking ill of the demonic courtyard. As for the trial itself, Yunsal must withstand 5 attacks from the martial arts master chosen by the White Demon Temple. The chief instructor Hyakrian stepped down from his position so that Yunsal could participate in the tournament. Chanchan questioned him many times why he decided so, and each time he heard the same answer: "You will soon find out everything yourself." So now Chanchan finally hopes to see the answer to this question. Grabbing the golden plate from this chapter, Yunsal left the office, and as soon as he found himself in the corridor, he immediately ran into Instructor Chin. Chin already knew about the trial and the topic, but still was glad to meet his student. But later Chin noticed Yunsal left a loophole in the pavilion of 10,000 demonic truths. Since Yunsal was his student, Chin decided to give him advice. There is no good deed without a reason. Almost always behind it hides an evil intention or purpose. And yet Chin was sure Yunsal would manage to extract a chance even from danger, because all trees hold on to their roots. In response, Yunsal sincerely thanked the instructor and promised he would definitely remember his words. Soon the young man stood before the entrance to the pavilion of 10,000 demonic truths, and to his surprise, the archive was hidden above. But inside the pavilion there was no cave, instead, a clearly organized library kingdom spread out here. Yunsal could not believe all the books in this place were dedicated only to combat techniques. Yet his time in the archive was limited, so Yunsal hurried and began studying. But as soon as he read a few books, he immediately realized this place was truly a trap. What was the trap? The books described secret techniques, but none could be mastered in one day, and if you get too deeply involved, you can simply waste time in vain. This was exactly what the Fire Rain School aimed for with the White Demon Temple. They wanted to confuse Yunsal. And Yunsal remembered Chin's words: "From any danger one must extract an opportunity." And the instructor also said that trees grow from roots, and Yunsal suddenly comprehended everything. He immediately began to rummage and leaf through books about the combat techniques of the Nangya Pavilion. And very soon he came across a volume titled The Wandering Beast in Reverse. It was to this technique that Yunsal devoted the entire remainder of the day. And the next day he arrived at the large training hall of the demonic court to undergo the trial. There Yunsal had already revived the former martial arts master of the demonic court Jayabin, and he would observe the trial. Besides him, among the judges was the leader of the secret shadow squad from the Sword of the Fiery Rain School Unsun. Also present were the section of the hall Deep Secrets from the Nangya Pavilion and the Master Ningek. And lastly, the commander of the Silent Dragon squad from the White Demon Temple, Gunfyeon. Then Jayabin reminded everyone, this trial is conducted at the request of the White Demon Temple and the Sword of the Fiery Rain School to verify whether Yunsal is sufficiently qualified as the successor of the demon. But if the young man passes the trial, White Demon and Fiery Rain must promise not to interfere anymore with what has been. At the demand of Unsun and Gunfyeon, they immediately assured they would have no more claims. Then Jayabin officially announced the start of the trial, and Gunfyeon took on conducting it. He approached Yunsal and clearly laid out the conditions. The young man would pass the trial if he could withstand 5 attacks. Yunsal did not respond with anything, he only drew his sword and immediately took a defensive stance. Then Gunfyeon began preparing his first of 5 attacks. It was the head of the White Demon Temple who ordered him to kill Yunsal during the trial. But Gunfyeon did not want to spoil relations with the Nangya Pavilion, so during the 5th attack he decided to simply cut off the young man's hands. The next moment the steel ribbon, like an arrow, flew straight at Yunsal. The young man managed to jump back and protect himself from the first strike. Gunfyeon wound the ribbon back onto his wrist and explained to Yunsal that this technique is called Heart of the White Demon. However, the squad commander was forced to admit the young man had indeed mastered the basics well. Then Gunfyeon moved on to the 2nd attack and used a technique called Descent of the Spirit of the White Demon. At that very second, not just one blade but 7 razor-sharp ribbons burst towards Yunsal like an arrow. But this time Yunsal did not dodge. On the contrary, he charged straight through and managed to slip past the blades. Gunfyeon praised the young man but immediately warned, from now on he must be on guard, because the 3rd attack would be a move called Chaotic Shadow of the White Demon. The next moment, a real hail of blades and edges rained down from the sky onto Yunsal. But the boy could not understand which of this was real and which was just an illusion. Then Yunsal decided to dodge everything using the Quick Phantom technique. And to Gunfyeon's surprise, the young man escaped with only a few cuts. But Yunsal understood everything. If he really wanted to kill, he would have done it long ago. And Gunfyeon was no longer so confident that he could just as easily cut off the youth's hands. Then he launched the fourth attack and used a move called Breath of the White Demon. And the next moment Yunsal was blinded by a cluster of whitish light. Because of this, he could not discern the essence of the enemy's technique, so he immediately understood he would die if he did not act at once. But suddenly Yunsal remembered the book, The Wandering Beast in Reverse. At first, he thought it simply criticized the Nangya Pavilion, but in the last chapters, it revealed the weak points of the beast's path. Most likely, the author deliberately created these images from the very beginning so that the students from the Nangya Pavilion would not stop reading. And the book said the beast's path is not omnipotent, it works only on instincts, like in animals. A true master does not think in vain, he sharpens his senses exactly when it is truly necessary. That is exactly what Yunsal did, so he saved himself from a deadly blow. Such a feat stunned everyone who was nearby. Gunfyeon was the most impressed because even masters of the White Demon find it incredibly difficult to protect themselves from this strike. Now he finally understood why the White Demon and the Fire Rain united to get rid of Yunsal. Because in the future this young man will become a source of problems, so he must be removed in advance. For this, Gunfyeon used the fifth and his strongest technique, the White Demon's Snake. Yunsal immediately dashed back, but to his surprise he saw a steel ribbon began chasing him like a living snake. This was the peculiarity of the White Demon's technique. The ribbon would not stop until it spilled the enemy's blood. So there was only one thing left, a matter of time before Yunsal's head would fly off his shoulders. He could not dodge the attack, so at that moment Yunsal used the sword technique, unmatched thunder and lightning. But even holding the furious power of thunder and all the might of lightning in his hands, he barely restrained Gunfyeon's strike. In the next moment, the unexpected happened. Yunsal's sword shattered like glass under the pressure of the enemy's attack. At that very moment, the steel ribbon pierced through the youth's shoulder. Everything happened so swiftly and so cruelly that Yunsal was thrown against the wall. Yet despite Gunfyeon's surprise, the youth still got up from the ground and saved his broken sword by grabbing it in time. And the White Demon Master became even more frightened by Yunsal's vengeful gaze, a fire burning with a full thirst for blood. Because of this, Gunfyeon felt completely uneasy. He clearly sensed the youth was stubbornly and unwaveringly determined to fight to the end. And it was confirmed once again in his mind. If he failed to kill Yunsal today, the latter would become a great threat to the White Demon. And just as Gunfyeon was about to attack again, his hand was suddenly intercepted by Ninhak. Master Nangya Pavilion reminded Gunfyeon he had already delivered all 5 strikes as agreed, so the trial was over. But Gunfyeon tore his hand away and boldly retorted, "What insolence is this?" Then Ninhak warned the master, if the White Demon does not keep his promise, he will renounce even his own, that which was given to the demonic palace. But before Gunfyeon could respond, Unsun intervened in the dispute. He declared that Yunsal used the sword technique of his school, and therefore the last strike must be annulled. And Ninhak objected. There were no conditions, no one forbade the youth from using techniques of other schools. Moreover, Yunsal used the thunder and lightning technique not without reason, and Ninhak was confident Master Jeong would be proud of his student. But Master Ninhak's words were taken by Unsun as an attempt to insult. Then Ninhak had to explain. Master Gunfyeon had just used the most powerful technique of the White Demon, and the youth managed to stop it by applying Master Jeong's technique. In other words, the White Demon Temple should be offended. Its absolute technique was surpassed by the art of the Fire Rain School. After these words, Master Unsun froze for a moment, barely restraining a satisfied smile. Then Master Jayobin reminded, this is a secret trial and no one must find out what exactly happened. Yet Unsun withdrew his accusations and eventually agreed to see the trial through to the end. Gunfyeon struggled to contain his irritation, but still nodded in response. Then Master Jayobin officially announced that the Nangya Pavilion disciple would again be recognized as one of the 10 demon heirs, and that he would be allowed to wield the sword. Ninhak congratulated Yunsal on successfully passing the trial. But the next moment the master realized, all this time the young man had already lost consciousness. So all Ninhak could do was to embrace Yunsal fatherly and say that now he could rest. Yunsal found himself already in bed and in a completely unfamiliar room. He did not know how much time had passed, but most importantly the young man did not understand whether he had passed the trial or not and what would happen to him now. In his current state, Yunsal could not discern this, so he decided to focus on the circulation of qi. But to his own surprise he noticed his body was full of genuine qi. Master Jumgun had once said that this young man's chi had accumulated more than 10 years ahead, and as soon as his hidden acupuncture point opened, the chi in his body would become even greater. It turns out that this trial involuntarily activated Yunsal's hidden point. And now he has already reached the third level of refinement technique, the very realm of reverse polarity. This level endows a person with invulnerability to fire and cold, but Yunsal still did not feel that he had become stronger. Suddenly, a maid entered the room. Yunsal immediately asked her, "What is this place and how did the trial go?" In response, the girl introduced herself as Jinsal and explained that this pavilion is called the Assembly of Demons. And here lives the pavilion elder Yakbun. Even Yunsal, knowing almost nothing about Mirim, had still heard this name. Yakbun stands at the pinnacle of martial mastery, and for his merits he was named the Bloody Demon. And Yunsal could not understand why he was brought specifically to the elder's residence and not to the medical hall. Meanwhile, Jinsal asked him to follow her. The elder ordered to escort the guest to the inner hall. Yunsal was very surprised that Yakbun wanted to meet him, but still he did not dare to test the elder's patience. And yet the inner garden turned out to be gigantic. The road to the meeting place consumed a whole reserve of time. But soon a gazebo appeared ahead, and inside, as promised, someone was already waiting for Yunsal. And this very someone turned out to be none other than the elder of the Assembly of Demons, Yakbun. He offered the guests a cup of tea and congratulated Yunsal on successfully passing the trial. Yunsal thanked the elder for the kind words and out of politeness took a sip. Then Yakbun inquired what kind of tea it was, and the young man frankly admitted he was not one of those who best understand tea. The elder recalled that Yunsal had previously worked as an undertaker and apologized to him for the tactlessness. Yunsal still could not believe it. That bloody demon who had swept through Jianghu and killed many Mirim masters now looked and behaved like a Taoist hermit. But later Yakbun stated that the young man was somewhat different from how he had been described. Like an experienced doctor, the elder noted, although Yunsal started studying martial arts late, his muscles and joints were well developed. Then Yunsal explained this was thanks to his grandfather who had taught him breathing techniques. Yakbun was satisfied with this answer but did not intend to meet the young man just for an ordinary conversation. The elder asked, as soon as Yunsal finishes training in the Nangya Pavilion, he will immediately move to the demonic palace. And 3 years after the young man joins the palace, Yakbun will accept him into the Dark Sky Squad. Thus, Yunsal will embark on the path of conquest and rise to one of the highest ranks of the demonic court. The boy had already heard about the Dark Sky Squad, the most elite squad of the demonic court, so it seemed there would be no other chance to join their ranks. Yet despite this, Yunsal dared to refuse the elder's proposals. Yakbun's face changed instantly. He cast a piercing look at the young man and asked why. Then Yunsal respectfully explained that if such a high position was guaranteed to him during training, he would become too complacent and would not be able to master the martial arts of the Nangya Pavilion. But the young man could not have predicted that in response to his words, the elder would suddenly burst out laughing loudly and, chuckling, release his kai. Its flow rose like a gust of strong wind, and meanwhile Yakbun declared that this is exactly how one should approach martial arts. When the elder finally composed himself, he calmly warned Yunsal that he would be watching him. Yakbun wanted to see how much the young man would grow over these 3 years, and then they would meet again in the same place. Yunsal realized he was allowed to leave, so after saying goodbye to the elder, he immediately disappeared. As soon as this happened, a master of the demonic court approached Yakbun and admitted he had never seen anyone reject the elder's offer. But Yakbun, without lowering his smile, suggested to observe this young man for now to find out which side he would choose. Meanwhile, Yunsal had already left the territory of the Demon Assembly Pavilion, and only after that was he finally able to stop and catch his breath. The boy was sure the trial he had passed was the harshest threat to his life, but he was mistaken. If during the conversation with the elder Yunsal had made a mistake, immediate death would have awaited him. However, after resting and pulling himself together, the young man realized he hadn't noticed how he had reached the city. Now the peaceful landscape seemed to Yunsal something rare and incredibly distant. He had changed too much and was too deeply immersed in a life he had never wanted. And as if to confirm this, Yunsal felt someone was watching him. The best thing now was to arm himself, and fortunately, there was a smithy nearby. Yunsal asked the blacksmith, "Is there training weaponry for sale?" He in response poked a finger at the box with defective swords and said he would give any of them for 5 nyans. Yunsal took the first blade that came to hand and leisurely left the city limits. Only reaching the field, he stopped and sternly ordered his pursuers to surrender. They did not have to wait long. Yunsal was surrounded. There were 6 of them, and all were in assassin robes. One of them drew a blade and declared that he would not allow one of the demon's successors to complete training and enter the world of Mirim. So now Yunsal must die here and now. But in response to the threat, Yunsal casually retorted, he does not wish to kill anyone, so he gives the assassins a chance to leave. However, these words did not sound as a warning to them. There were more of them, and all pressed forward. Yunsal was left no other way, so he drew his sword. The leader of the assassins declared, drawing the blade is already pointless because Yunsal's life is already in their hands. After that, he ordered the rest of the assassins to disperse and take their positions. They circled around Yunsal synchronously, trying to confuse him. In the next moment, one of the assassins rushed into attack, but Yunsal parried his strike with a sword. In following the first assassin, the second struck and Yunsal had to retreat backward. At that very moment, the third killer attacked from behind, and the young man miraculously managed to dodge his blow. The assassins' attacks came one after another without pause, so Yunsal immediately realized, these two have long been practicing everything as a pair. And if you look at their team coordination through the prism of the beast's path, it becomes obvious the difference in skill between them is too noticeable. So Yunsal managed to expose a weak spot in the opponent's formation, and with one precise strike took down one of them. The death of their comrade shocked the assassins, but their leader immediately ordered to switch to the third formation. But there was no point in this, the skill would not change anyway. And Yunsal clearly proved the opposite. He dealt with 3 more enemies. After that, the leader of the assassins realized too late that the demonic palace had fed them false information. The assassins did not expect that their target possessed great sword techniques and knew the Mirim battle formations. But Yunsal cold-bloodedly laid everything out clearly. This is not martial art, this is his struggle for survival. The assassins lost because they relied too much on their own advantage in a clash where life was at stake. From these words, the leader of the assassins finally realized, all this time they themselves were the prey and the true predator is right here, right in front of them. For now, his subordinate suggested retreating to report what happened and gather strength. But the next moment, the assassin leader personally killed the last comrade and declared, fleeing from the enemy means losing honor. Then Yunsal asked, is honor really more important than one's own life? The last assassin proudly replied, unlike demonic warriors, they hold the sword not for personal glory, but to fight for honor. But Yunsal's words did not impress. On the contrary, they angered him greatly, because you cannot take honor with you to the grave. So the next moment he slit the killer's throat so swiftly that he did not even have time to realize what happened. Yet dying, the assassin managed to swear he would curse Yunsal even in the afterlife. Yunsal glanced over the ground, strewn with corpses and soaked in blood, and this brought a memory of the hellish island. Then the young man remembered again. The place where he stands has already turned into hell. There is no salvation from the cycle of hatred here. But this was the price he had to pay for walking this path for the sake of revenge. And just as Yunsal's gloomy thoughts froze, they were interrupted by a carriage that suddenly drove onto the field. The young man was even more surprised when Commander Pikheon stepped out of the carriage. Yunsal was about to ask what he was doing here, but the commander sharply stopped the young man and briefly explained, tracking him was easy. Then Pikheon examined the bodies and weapons of the assassins and suggested returning to the Nangya pavilion. In the pavilion, they were already awaited by Vice-Head Danhan. He immediately invited Yunsal and Pikheon to his office. Danhan had already been informed about the result of the trial, so he immediately congratulated the young man. However, later he asked Yunsal, during the trial was he not wounded? In response, the young man said that after the trial he was treated at the residence of Elder Yakbun. This almost left Pikheon speechless. And this did not concern only him. Danhan also found it hard to believe what he heard, so Yunsal had to explain everything from the very beginning. After the explanations, the vice-head finally understood why the Fire Rain School and the White Demon Temple so willingly recognized the trial's result. Yunsal, of course, knew that Elder Yakbun was strong, but could his position really be that great? Then Pikheon had to explain. The demonic court has a head, the elder of the Assembly of Demons Pavilion, and 10 demonic schools that divide power among themselves into 3 parts. And the pavilion of Elder Yakbun has more power than the others after all. It gathers all the masters of martial arts from the previous generation. As soon as these words were spoken, Yunsal immediately realized, a meeting with the elder is an extremely serious matter. Meanwhile, Danhan looked at Pikhyun and asked if he still had any reason to report. The commander quickly reported an ambush was set against Yunsal. But a moment later, the porcelain cup in Danhan's hands cracked, and the vice president himself seemed to have been replaced. Grinding his rage through his teeth, he asked Pikhyun, who dared to set an ambush for their student. Then the commander reported it was the Murim Alliance, and judging by the weapons people of the chief strategist from the Autumn Wind Squad. Pikhyun's words calmed the vice head, but he still did not understand why the alliance would hunt a young man who had just joined the Nangya Pavilion. The commander suggested the alliance tried to kill Yunsal before he became stronger. This only made Danhan more agitated. The boy had not yet properly mastered martial arts, and already so many enemies' eyes were fixed on him. On the other hand, the hero had to go through trials, so Danhan could only hope they would manage to make Yunsal stronger. So far, the young man turned to the vice leader with a question about a special squad called Divinity, made up of the strongest and fiercest fighters of the Nangya Pavilion. The reason was simple and at the same time very personal. Yunsal himself expressed a desire to join this squad to study martial arts through real experience. The decision of the young man Pikhyun shocked him. Divinity was gathered from the most brutal and cruel people in the entire pavilion. And also Sojo, even a whole squad leader, known for her excessively nasty character. She sent Nangya students she considered unworthy to be killed under the guise of a trial. Yet Yunsal firmly stated, if he dies because he turns out to be insufficiently prepared, the fault will be only his. Moreover, the young man wanted to become stronger as quickly as possible, and he saw the most effective way as testing himself in real fights and watching how masters fight in real conditions. Pikhyun was about to object, but this time his opinion differed from Danhan's. He decided to trust the young man's judgment and did not object if Yunsal was taken into the squad as a temporary member. He did not dare argue with vice leader Pikhyun, so, resigned, he promised to inform Sojo. The next day, the commander found her in a hotel called Thousand Successes. However, the squad leader was not at all pleased with the idea of going down to the Valley of Thunder for the Green Boy. Pikhyun reminded this is a direct order from the vice head of the pavilion, but Sojo stubbornly insists on her own. She says she will go to him personally and refuse to carry out the order. Then Pikhyun showed her the sign of the heavenly wolf, the symbol of the vice head of the pavilion. This means Pikhyun has full right to speak and give orders on behalf of Danhan, so Sojo had no right to argue with him. But despite everything, Pikhyun assured that Yunsal is not a brat at all, as everyone thinks. Moreover, he passed the trials of the Fire Rain School and the White Demon Temple. Sojo still could not understand why everyone defended him so much, but eventually agreed to take him only on one condition. First, she will test Yunsal to find out if he is truly worthy to become a disciple of the Nangya Pavilion. And for this, he will go together with the Divinity Squad to the Valley of Thunder and Wind. There in that valley, the lair of a sect that grew out of heresy is hidden. These sectarians train martial arts, they change their own bodies and perform strength exercises for hours. Because of this, they engage in human trafficking. Both traditional schools and demonic ones equally despise them. But despite everything, the sect managed to survive precisely because the valley became a reliable fortress for them. That is why the Divinity Squad and the Nangya Pavilion hesitated about this mission. The road to the cultist's lair was only a rope bridge hanging over a wide chasm. And above the abyss, a strong wind howled, knocking people down and confusing their steps. On the other side, a guard post was on duty, and the watch would immediately collapse the bridge as soon as a stranger appeared. The mission was already supposed to be difficult, and now Sojo had to closely watch the one imposed on her, Yunsal. She entrusted dealing with the guards to her deputy Jae-Shevon. The master skillfully threw 2 daggers at once across the chasm and hit exactly the narrow window. From the outside, it might have seemed simple, but Yunsal knew everything depended on the technique of unity of body and blade, which he learned at the Fire Rain School. Meanwhile, Jae-Shevon warned that he had dealt with the guards inside the building, but some hidden device might be lurking on the bridge. Sojo wanted all members of her squad to survive, so she ordered Yunsal to go first. But to her surprise, the young man did not argue and obediently moved toward the bridge. Yunsal immediately realized, in such strong wind, he would not be able to keep his balance. So he decided to use the absorption technique to stick his feet to the bridge planks. Ji-won noted that the young man had quite skillfully mastered this technique, but Sojo stubbornly insisted that it was nonsense. But the next moment, Ji-won heard the hidden mechanism activate. He only managed to shout to the young man, "Beware," and at that very second a hail of arrows flew towards him. But Yunsal did not panic. He immediately dashed upward, then used the step to the sky technique to rise even higher. Such a trick impressed Jiwon, but suddenly it was not enough. Because as soon as Yunsal landed on the bridge, the trap triggered again, this time hitting the young man directly. However, the arrows only struck a mirage. The real Yunsal used the quick phantom technique to cross the chasm. Having reached the other side, the young man rushed to the guard post. There he found a lever that disabled the trap, so he immediately pulled it. When the mechanism finally fell silent, the young man shouted. The squad heard the trap was disabled and the path was now open. This move surprised even Sajo. In such an extreme situation, Yunsal skillfully used a skill that cripples the legs at the slightest mistake. And so, gazing at this extraordinary young man, Sajo could not help but wonder, who is he really? The founder's squad, led by So Jiang, cautiously made their way deeper into the cave. Suddenly, Yi Yoon praised Saul for his impressive leg technique and asked if he had learned the swift ghost moves from Master Go. Saul nodded confidently, and So Jiang clearly caught what the conversation was about. She insisted that Yi Yoon should not praise the novice unnecessarily. But Yi Yoon advised Saul to ignore it after all. So Jiang never praises anyone at all. Of course, Saul's technique somewhat impressed So Jiang, but it was still not enough to pass his test. Finally, the founder's squad reached their goal, the underwater lake, and So Jiang immediately ordered her subordinates to stop. Before diving, each squad member made their own preparations, and Saul found this unclear, so he decided to clarify with Yi Yoon. He answered like this: Saul had joined them very recently, so he might not know about this lake. This lake is connected to the Valley of Thunder and Wind. If you dive and swim through the underwater tunnel, you can come out right at the destination of their journey. But the entire surface of the lake is covered with icy essences that can freeze even a whole well. Diving into the water, a person will have to continuously spend all their internal energy for about 15 minutes to protect their body from the cold. If you don't do this, everything will happen instantly. You will freeze and sink to the bottom. Therefore, Yi Yoon suggested Saul stay and wait. And Saul, ignoring his remark, dived into the lake. Would he have come here if he were afraid of death? Wading into the water, Saul immediately noticed huge ice crystals. Now he understood what Ji Eung meant. But something was wrong. The other squad fighters writhed in pain and barely stayed afloat, so the ice essence really had some effect. However, despite not using internal energy, Saul did not feel the cold at all. And then Saul finally realized it was because he had recently reached a state of invulnerability to fire and water, so the cold simply didn't work. Surfacing from the water, Saul noticed with surprise, all the other squad members were moving as if circulating their chi. Some squad fighters did not understand how Saul could remain calm while swimming through the ice essence. So Jiang also noticed this. Saul's internal energy was so stable that it did not require circulation. Now So Jiang understood more clearly why the deputy pavilion leader sent Saul specifically to her squad and what trial still lay ahead. When all squad members regained consciousness, So Jiang ordered to move out. The fighters, fired up by the upcoming battle, responded with a joyful roar. As soon as the Osnavani squad emerged from the cave, fierce resistance from the enemy immediately attacked them. Saul was not going to fall behind his colleagues and delivered a serious blow to the enemy who attacked him first. To Saul's surprise, the enemy not only did not retreat, he even tried to counterattack. This is what power-grabbing demons look like. They are created from pills and physical enhancement. Demons did not feel pain and continued their advance even when wounded, so Saul could not help but wonder how to fight such an enemy at all. So Young interrupted his thoughts, sharply ordered to retreat and not get underfoot. So Young herself dashed forward. In a moment, she dealt with a couple of demons which completely threw Saul off track. So Saul firmly decided, from now on, being in the epicenter of chaos, he would observe the master's techniques and make them his own. And the enemies did not stop attacking, so Saul told himself, if he just dodges and counterattacks, he will manage using the beast path and fast phantom. And even if Saul does not fight at all, it will not disrupt the balance of the battle in any way. Therefore, Saul decided to use this time to observe the fight of the divinity members and learn from their actions. The first one Saul paid attention to was So Young. She skillfully struck down opponents one after another. The blade technique So Young used pierced Saul through. With one strike, she inflicted numerous injuries on the enemy. This move was unlike an ordinary one. It resembled a sword technique. It had so many piercing and spinning movements. The first time Saul, of course, failed, but he observed So Young a little more and finally grasped the meaning. This was not a fixed position sword technique. During execution, it was necessary to change position to keep up with parrying the opponent's attacks. Saul recalled his grandfather's words, "When a sword technique reaches a certain level of mastery, it ceases to be a limited form and movements." It turns out So Jiang did not use any specific technique, she only read into the weak points of her opponents and fought relying on that. Although it was only one attack, it contained 9 trajectories of movement. Realizing this, Saul decided to apply the acquired knowledge. Having dealt with the opponents, So Jiang noticed that Saul had been watching her intently for some time. Suddenly, the moment came Saul managed to strike the opponent twice with one blow. Saul was confused by only 2 trajectories, but at that moment it was the best he could do. And yet So Jiang across from him shuddered with surprise. Saul just glanced and with one sword delivered 2 strikes while it took her 2 years to master this technique. Realizing he could achieve no more, Saul began to watch the deputy chief. Yi Yun thought that Saul had just copied So Jiang's technique and now switched to her. The extreme impulse of the blade So Jiang used was based on the beast's path, so Saul was able to somewhat copy her move. But in his martial arts, Yi Yun used flying daggers and the dragon roar sword technique, so he decided it would not be enough for Saul to just see this. At first, he skillfully cut down 2 opponents with a sword, and then just as elegantly threw daggers at the enemies standing nearby. Of course, Yi Ung was pleased with himself. Saul definitely would not repeat that. But Saul, to his own surprise, grabbed the spear with his other hand, lunged forward, and handled the enemies quite skillfully. Yi Ung froze. Most people would probably focus on the fact that he was wielding daggers. But Saul did not stop at just one type of weapon. Instead, he examined the entire essence of his martial arts. As Saul expected, he lacked the strength to fully copy the deputy's technique. Such a technique cannot be mastered in an instant, so if it weren't for the archive records, Saul would not have been able to embody this pitiful semblance of copying. Next, the one Saul intended to observe was Jin Woo, the first swordsman in the squad. Jin Woo kept pace with his comrades and fiercely cut through the opponents. Although Jin Woo's sword technique did not belong to the sect of the Fire Rain, the power emanating from him was simply incredible. Saul was amazed such simple agility could cause so much chaos, so in this case an outside perspective would not provide any advantage. Therefore, Saul began to examine the bodies of Jin Woo's fallen enemies with interest. It seemed Saul was so focused on studying the wounds that he did not notice the enemy sneaking up from behind. And when the enemy was already ready to deliver the decisive blow, Saul, without turning around, drove the sword all the way to the hilt into his chest. Finally, Saul realized, as soon as Jin Woo established contact with the opponent, he infused his sword with true chi to maximize power. Suddenly, shouts, curses, and swearing came from above. Raising their heads, everyone immediately understood the leader of the Wind and Thunder Valley sect had arrived. The sect leader was not going to let the opponent recover and immediately used the poisonous palm. The members of the founder's squad, exhausted by the poison, had to retreat. So Jiang could not tolerate this and immediately launched an attack. With a single swing of her sword, she easily dispelled the sect leader's technique. And then she rained a hail of furious strikes on him. At some point, So Jiang noticed that Saul was watching the duel very attentively. Until now, So Jiang had denied Saul's talent because she did not want to acknowledge a child who had only recently begun studying martial arts. But in such a short time, Saul managed to copy the techniques of the fighters in her squad, and now So Jiang could no longer deny his talent. The sect leader was furious. How dare So Jiang get distracted at such a critical moment, and he decided to teach her a lesson. The sect leader was about to use his technique again, but So Jiang counterattacked in time and struck the opponent right in the right arm. The bones could not withstand the load. The arm broke. The weakened sect leader collapsed to the ground powerless. Finally, to defeat such a formidable opponent, So Jiang ordered her fighters to deal with those who remained and returned to the pavilion of the wandering beast. A week had passed since Saul completed the mission together with the founder's squad. Watching the martial arts masters engage in a real fight, Saul was learning and suddenly reflected on how much he himself had changed. After all, Saul was too focused on mastering various martial arts as quickly as possible. So in the end, he did not really understand which standards of mastery were truly valued. As soon as Saul rose to a higher level in his cultivation technique, before the next breakthrough, he wanted to prepare properly. Finally climbing the Iron Peak, Saul greeted Gimgan. He smiled quite a bit also because he had already heard about Saul's achievements. So I decided Saul came to him to learn more about cultivation, and he was not mistaken. Because Saul had not yet laid the foundations, and it was already time for him to face an obstacle precisely because of this. Teaching Saul, Gimgen believed that it would take at least 3 years to reach the 3rd level, but it seems he miscalculated. Grabbing Saul by the hand, Gimgen decided to check his internal energy. And I was pleasantly surprised. The pure true chi, which Saul had been gathering since childhood, transformed into antipolarity thanks to the activation of dormant vessels. He already knew this, so his feelings could not be wrong. And then Gimgen explained to him the measures of martial arts. The first rank when the body and internal energy reach the absolute maximum. When a person crosses this boundary and rises to the peak of martial arts, everything they have learned is already the highest peak, and beyond it comes the divine limit. Having reached this boundary state, one can freely control body and spirit, breaking the chains of the human body. And beyond that, the infinite level, the pinnacle of martial arts and the attainment of perfection. Only the head of the Murim Alliance and the ruler of the demonic palace have managed to reach such a level, a duo of heavenly emperors, orthodox in form, yet paved by unorthodox paths. Below them 3 demons and 3 respected ones, then 4 divine beings and 7 kings. All of them have already crossed the infinite boundary. And finally, the boundary of divine intent. This is the stage where you unite with beings of primordial origin and comprehend the will of the heavens. Currently, Saul was at the initial stage of the peak boundary state, although in the cultivation technique of reverse polarity he had already managed to reach the 3rd boundary level. When he reaches the 4th limit, then he will be able to create true chi that protects the body, and it is at that moment Saul will attain the highest peak. Having reached the 5th boundary, he will be able to give form to his internal energy, and at the 6th, Saul's internal energy will circulate endlessly throughout the entire body. At the 7th limit, he will remove the chains that hold his body, and at the last, Saul must gain the power to intervene in all living things. The last words of Gimgen Saul sounded unclear, and the monk himself could not properly explain their meaning. He only reached the 5th stage. But despite everything, Gimgen still managed to piece together the puzzle. Saul finally prepared to enter the Jianghu arena, otherwise he would not have extracted all these answers from him. Saul only nodded confidently. He realized, it is in real battles that a person becomes both the strongest and the fastest. Moreover, Saul decided, traveling Jianghu is the wiser path if he wants to obtain information about his grandfather's killer. Then Gimgen advised Saul to visit Master Call, saying that he had to share the necessary data about Jianghu. Saul sincerely thanked Gimgen for his wisdom and advice and set off to Master Call. Some time later, Saul found himself in a forge. Master Call was working at that moment. At that moment, a heavy folder fell onto the table. Master Call had gathered in it all the data that might be needed by Saul. Quickly reviewing the data, Saul was extremely surprised. It contained the political situation in Jianghu and information about famous martial arts masters. For an ordinary blacksmith, this was too detailed knowledge, so Saul could not understand. How does Master Call know all this? If Saul reads the information, there should be no difficulties. However, Call advised to burn the materials after reading. Saul, of course, had no doubt. Call is not an ordinary person since he holds such valuable information. Still, Saul decided to ask directly, who could have such extraordinary abilities that ultimately led to his grandfather's death. Having carefully listened to all of Saul's observations, Call pondered. With high probability it was a spy who would not reveal their identity in Jianghu. Saul was shocked. It turns out Master Call believes that the killer does not belong to the masters of the demonic path. Then he should also beware of orthodox martial arts masters. As Master Call said, all the traces left by the killer were deliberately planted to mislead others. On Saul's face was confusion, and Call suggested he join the rescue squad. The rescue squad deals with murders, kidnappings, and theft of especially important resources, carrying out tasks that the demonic palace officially does not recognize. Call thought this would be a great moment for Saul to knock out from life what he desires so much. He himself understood under the current circumstances, figuring out the killer and reaching the truth would be extremely difficult. But if he joins the rescue squad, he will probably be able to find a clue. The rescue squad is entrusted with deadly dangerous tasks every time you risk your life, so Saul will also become stronger. In the evening, Saul entered Danhan's chambers and informed him of his desire to set out for Jianghu. Danhan smiled in response. That's why Saul came. Could it be that he lacked the experience gained in the founding squad? Although this experience was extremely valuable to Saul, he still felt he needed real, live clashes for the martial art to truly come alive. Danhan understood this, but he could not just let Saul go after all. He was the deputy of the pavilion. To get permission to go out into Jianghu, Saul had to be in the hall or in the squad and have the consent of their leader. Saul knew these rules perfectly, so he immediately declared his intention to join the rescue squad. Danhan froze as if rooted to the spot. Where did he get the idea that this was allowed? Still, he could not permit it. But Saul already knew exactly what the rescue squad did. As soon as he joined, his identity would be erased and he would have to risk his life on every building. Danhan was beside himself. The rescue squad was going to take on all the nastiest work for the demonic palace, and Saul would not be able to count on anyone's help. Only those who try to atone for their crimes or urgently need huge money are taken into the rescue squad. Could Saul really be going to do this? And Saul needed to become stronger as soon as possible, and if the path to strength lay through the rescue squad, then so be it. The 10 demonic masters are just a tool to eliminate orthodox martial arts masters, so the stronger he becomes, the better. Gritting his teeth, Danhan still agreed with Saul. Most of the 10 demonic sects use their masters only for their own purposes. And the Pavilion of the Stray Beast was an exception. Danhan sought to make Saul a full-fledged member. Saul understood where Danhan was leaning, and that was precisely why he had to join the rescue squad. Judging by what I saw, the people from the Wandering Night Pavilion did not become stronger neither in comfort nor under protection. Danhan laughed heartily. It seemed Saul was not going to change his decision. So Danhan still had to agree, but only for 1 year. If at any point Saul is satisfied with his progress, he leaves the squad without hesitation and returns to the pavilion. After Saul set off to Jianghu, Danhan decided not to miss the opportunity and gave him one truly useful piece of advice. Saul's appearance was too conspicuous. Moreover, he was the most famous among the 10 demonic masters, so hiding his face was supposed to work in his favor. Having flown to Dongting Lake, Saul looked around the surroundings with interest. Earlier, when Saul came here under his real name, people whispered behind his back, so he was sincerely glad that Danhan taught him to change his appearance. Finally, he came across a battered building. Saul held his breath. Could this really be the branch of the rescue squad in Yuyang? He carefully knocked on the door. Saul peeked inside. Between the bookshelves, it was surprisingly quiet and calm, like in a library. Saul truly wondered, is this really the base of the rescue squad? Suddenly, an unknown voice greeted him from ahead. Turning around, Saul noticed an elderly man who immediately asked what exactly he was looking for here. Saul pulled a book out from under his kimono, replied that he came to sell it, and handed it to the elderly person. He looked at the book with interest and immediately noticed a small red symbol on the cover. The man's expression changed sharply. He handed the book back to Saul and stated that it was too old, so he wouldn't get much for it. Then Saul suggested exchanging the book for another. Turning around, he heard the elderly man's shout, and a boy immediately jumped out from the neighboring room. The elderly man was asked by Mon, that was the boy's name, to show Saul the books that were inside the store. As soon as Mon closed the door, his aura immediately changed. Saul felt it just as instantly. Turning around, Mon introduced himself. He was a mediator of the Yuyang branch of the rescue squad. He explained that for the convenience of the rescue squad fighters, tasks are named by numbers. Saul would be assigned number 18. Mon extended a book. He offered Saul to choose one task and promised to explain the details himself. Saul looked carefully into the book and immediately caught on to one task: to retrieve Bashan incense. Reward, 500 silver nyan. There was only one thing left that he could not understand, a note from the 3rd issue. Mon explained it was the number of times such tasks had been announced. Either this task was failed 3 times in a row, or it hung without a performer for so long that it was published for the 3rd time. Now Saul finally understood. Mainly this book contained tasks for theft or spreading disinformation. For Saul, these missions made no sense. He needed something else, a fight that would be a trial and would wear down his weakness, making him stronger. Once again, carefully rereading all the tasks, Saul stopped at one and became interested in it. Secretly eliminate the deputy head of the Soul Preservation Hall of the Cult of the Bloody Yin. But Mon immediately stated that such a task was not suitable for him, and Saul became curious why exactly. Then Mon explained, tasks have 4 levels and the closer the number is to 1, the more difficult the mission. The first level is intended only for the strongest, so the second is the maximum that Saul could count on. And also, the deputy head of the Soul Preservation Hall was long considered a known master of martial arts, so usual techniques would not work. Exactly what Saul was looking for, he slammed the book and still decided to take this task. Then Mon flared up with indignation. Did Saul not listen to him at all? You can't just deal with the deputy head of the Soul Preservation Hall so easily. But Saul did not care. The Book of Master Ch Call contained information about the deputy head of the hall, so he did not consider this task unfulfilled. Mon sighed sadly and said that the clothes and equipment that might be needed for the mission were already prepared. Mon tugged on a string on one of the lanterns and it opened a passage to a secret room where various types of weapons lay. While he rummaged through one of the drawers, Mon threw the equipment at Saul's feet. Everything was old and rusty, so Saul quickly realized the rescue squad did not want to waste good equipment on someone they considered doomed. Yet Saul was determined to prove his worth. He completed the task, quickly grabbed the items, and waved goodbye to Mon. As soon as Saul stepped over the threshold, the door opened, and an elderly man asked how everything went. Mon just waved his hand and said that Saul had chosen a first-level task from the start, so most likely they would not see him again. As soon as the elderly man heard that Saul had taken on the assassination of Sok Jiang from the Bloody Yin cult, he was overcome with horror. All elite fighters had failed this mission. That is why Mon gave Saul the first available equipment. He did not want to waste the rescue squad's resources in vain. The island of Bloody Yin, an evil sect of the demonic path, growing out of the blood cults. But even in this piece of land cut off from the world, supplies were indispensable. So Saul, skillfully disguised, decided to use ships to infiltrate the island of Bloody Yin. At the pier, people kept bustling back and forth, preparing boxes and barrels for loading. Someone called Saul and asked for help. He grabbed the rope and rushed there. A harsh shout made Saul turn around, but he didn't have time to respond. A sword blade was already pressed against his throat. Saul was so stunned that he only managed to greet the stranger. The man with a beard apparently was clearly disappointed by Saul's reaction. It turned out he was not a spy, since he allowed himself to be wounded without resistance. He released Saul, sheathed the sword, and called a doctor to treat the wounded man. The doctor carefully stitched the wound and applied a bandage. Although blood was oozing, the wound was shallow, so it was expected to heal within a week. Saul felt his neck, briefly thanked the doctor for the help, and headed to a nearby hut. Saul slammed the door and exhaled with relief. It was very close. He was almost exposed. The harsh skills of the members of the Bloody Yin made doctors avoid asking unnecessary questions, and Saul also noted, merchants treat them with respect. Thanks to the technique of changing appearance, the substitution of the deputy head, and the Master Ch Hall's masking technique, Saul managed to hide flawlessly. The ship was sailing tomorrow morning, so Saul had to deal with Sok Jiang tonight no matter what. At dusk, Saul swiftly crossed the thicket and, standing at the edge of the cliff, saw with his own eyes the heretical sect of the Bloody Yin. Using the technique of extreme speed without a shadow, Saul covered a huge distance and, climbing onto the roof of the building, began to observe what was happening. Right there he spotted Sok Jiang. His inner energy was felt even from such a distance. But Saul was still uneasy about something. A person who had already faced assassins 9 times was still releasing his inner energy so openly. Perhaps it was a trap, but Saul did not get distracted and followed Sok Jiang. Sneaking into the building, Saul hid behind a column in the large hall and carefully watched Sok Jiang. By the smell of medicine, Saul determined this room could lead to the sect's elixir storage. As was known, this storage was underground and sealed, which meant that here the murder looked perfect. Sok Jiang crossed the entire hall and was already about to go down the stairs when he suddenly froze for a moment, then moved on again. Zolt exhaled with relief. Could it be that the deputy head really noticed him? Quietly descending the stairs, Saul slipped through the open door and found himself in a fairly spacious room filled with light. With his back to Saul stood the completely unarmed Sok Jiang, the perfect moment to launch an attack. Saul was already about to rush forward when the slab beneath his feet suddenly gave way. At that very moment, coins clinked from above. They poured down and embedded themselves into the floor. Fortunately, Saul managed to pull back and slip out of the trap. Without looking back, Sok Jiang said that the assassins are completely useless today. They always choose this very spot to attack. Drawing the sword from behind his back, Sok Jiang only smiled. Saul appeared just in time. There was still enough room in the pot for one assassin's head. Sok Jiang also explained that the assassins always sneak onto the ship and try to kill him in this very room at night. So he had to set traps, and each time the assassins kept falling into them again and again. Saul was convinced the weakness of the rescue squad was precisely that the operatives did not know each other. Although this preserved secrecy, without publicity people still ran into the same traps. Noticing that Saul looked young, Sok Jiang decided not to use his precious weapon and threw away the refined weapon. Instead, he took an ordinary blade from the wall and ordered Saul to attack. Of course, Saul understood everything. He had already failed the mission, but that was not important at all. First, he only needed a dangerous fight. He rushed forward swiftly. The opponents clashed blades, and the metal sharply rang with a screech. No one was going to retreat just like that. After a few moments, the opponents parted, and Sok Jiang smiled and noted, "Saul has good internal energy. Assassins usually do not show such sword technique." Although the opponent was quite fast, Saul understood. If he remained calm, he could completely parry all the attacks. When Saul already thought he had blocked Sok Jiang's strike, a sharp pain pierced his right shoulder. Grinning, Sok Jiang raised his sword to deliver a deadly blow, but Saul managed to parry it. It was strange to Saul why the opponent did not exploit the gaps in his defense. All of Sok Jiang's attacks were not aimed at vital points. So Saul decided, if Sok Jiang was not going to kill him instantly, he himself would press further to reveal the essence of his techniques. Saul rushed into attack, and Sok Jiang laughed heartily and easily parried each of his strikes. Suddenly, Sok Jiang tried to strike from his left shoulder, but as soon as Saul wanted to dodge it, the direction of the attack instantly changed. Saul immediately realized this was a variation technique that worked on feints. Sok Jiang froze in surprise. Saul managed to understand that his strikes were not real, but only distracting feints. Yet despite everything, Sok Jiang was confident. Saul would not be able to dodge all attacks if he only observed. But Saul thought otherwise. Possessed the beast's path. He closes his eyes and easily parries every attack of the opponent. Sok Jiang was furious. How does this inexperienced killer manage to parry his attacks? Saul, focusing, applied the extreme speed without shadow technique and sharply launched into an attack. Sok Jiang made two terrible mistakes. First, he gave Saul time to reveal his moves to counterattack. And second, he overestimated himself so much that he renounced his own true weapon. Saul delivered a powerful strike and broke Sok Jiang's sword, but he managed to push the opponent back. Things were going badly, so Sok Jiang decided to call his disciples as soon as possible. He was already reaching for the whistle hanging around his neck, but Saul quickly closed the distance and drove the sword deep into Sok Jiang's chest up to the hilt. Sok Jiang fell motionless onto the stone floor, with one thought ringing in his head: how could he die at the hands of a miserable mercenary? Casting one last glance at the fallen opponent, Saul pondered, even a world master of martial arts could not save himself from his poisonous recklessness. The next day, the worried Mon rushed to the chief, who was calmly sipping tea, and reported that Sok Jiang was found dead. Returning to Yuhin, Saul noticed with surprise the locals were talking only about Sok Jiang's murder. Entering the rescue squad branch, Saul greeted as appropriate, and Wang immediately dropped all tasks and rushed to him. Quickly closing the branch door, Van inquired whether Saul really managed to handle Sok Jaehan and how exactly he succeeded. Only Saul nodded confidently and noted that, as he was told, the branch provides work and support only on missions and nothing more. Van sighed with understanding. Of course, Saul was right. He would no longer interfere in other people's affairs. Rummaging in the desk drawer, Van took out a reward for Saul, 3,000 nyongs, and reminded him that the next task could be taken only after 3 days. Saul took the money and waved goodbye, leaving a few bills for the staff for a glass of good rice wine. Yet Mon was extremely outraged by such an act. He would not allow himself to be treated that way. Van advised him to treat Saul kindly and not forbid him from taking difficult missions. Because if rumors about their successes reach the top, maybe they will finally be able to leave this place. Half a year had passed since Saul became a member of the rescue squad. Saul appeared again at the branch after another successful mission. Van and Mon immediately rushed to him. Good-naturedly patted Saul on the shoulder. Mon immediately showered him with compliments. It was precisely thanks to him that the bookstore thrived day by day. In fact, Saul came to take a new task, but it was obvious. Van and Mon wanted to tell him something important. After coughing, Van announced that Salia's work had attracted the attention of higher-ups, so they assigned a mission specifically for him. Its essence was simple: to accompany a disguised person who had just arrived in Jianghu to survey the area. Salia was not interested in such missions, so he hurriedly tried to disappear as quickly as possible. But Mon immediately grabbed his hand and said that the compensation for a mission of the Gap rank was about 10,000 nyongs per day. Of course, Van knew Salia did not need money. Moreover, he himself preferred to engage only in combat missions. Still, he should have thought about it. After all, Van, as he said, was simply carrying out a direct order from the top. And if Salia refused, she could be removed. Not without reason, the entire branch could be at risk, up to the point that it might cease to exist. But if he accepted the mission, Van promised, not only all the branch's equipment but all available information would become accessible to Salia. These words made Salia hold his breath and once again sink into thought. How long would he have access to this information? Van replied that there would be no restrictions. After all, they were in the same boat. Such an answer completely satisfied Salia and he agreed, but only this time. As soon as the door closed behind Salia, Mon immediately became angry. How could Van promise such a thing? But Van advised him to pull himself together because as soon as the task was completed, they would be able to return to the demonic palace. With the onset of evening, Saul arrived at the luxurious restaurant and there was not a single free seat. The hall was completely packed with visitors. As soon as Saul was inside, he headed to the table where a young girl and an elderly man were sitting. Approaching the table laden with expensive food, Saul introduced himself and immediately informed that he had arrived by order to carry out a protection mission. The girl smiled, quickly glanced at Saul and introduced herself. Her name was Suk. Then Saul nodded at the elderly man, who clearly was not pleased by the stranger's appearance, and Suk said that his name was Old Man Moon Hwan. Casting a glance at the young girl and the old man, Saul concluded they definitely had both status and money. As soon as Saul pulled a chair and was about to sit next to them, Old Man Moon Hwan immediately advised him not to stand out. And then he threatened Saul with trouble if he dared to disrupt Lady Ok's tour. Saul immediately felt an oppressive aura rising from Moon Hwan. It turned out that he could exert pressure just by his presence. Suk immediately asked Moon Hwan to stop and sharply questioned why he threatened every man who wanted to help. So Saul made a suggestion. The elder accompanying the young lady was quite capable of taking on protection as well. Suk apologized and hoped for understanding from Saul because Moon Hwan had actually long left Jianghu, and this greatly worried the main sect. These words made Saul freeze in thought. So Moon Hwan is really a master of the previous generation, and if he had long since left Jianghu, then the sense of danger could really dull. In this region, different forces clashed face to face, so Saul needed to be absolutely sure no incident would ruin her plans or affect the main thing. To ease the tension and steer the conversation in another direction, Suk glanced at Saul. His name is strange. After all, in the branch he was called the 18th. Saul only then explained, in the rescue squad, fighters have no personal names, there is only a mark in the squad. At first, Suk was confused, but after a moment, smiling, she decided to call Saul Teacher Ho. In principle, Saul did not care how he was addressed. He himself decided to call himself Suk, Lady So. This option completely suited Suk, and then she asked if Saul wore a false face for the same reason. Saul was stunned until now no one had noticed this. Politely smiling, Suk explained. She has quite sharp observation, so she noticed that the muscles on Saul's face moved somewhat unnaturally. And then Saul pondered, if Suk noticed even such a small detail, it turns out she is much stronger than he initially assumed. Suddenly Saul realized, as soon as he stepped over the tavern threshold, people were already repeating the same phrases they had just said earlier. It turned out that everyone in the restaurant was an assassin, set against their table. The only joy for Salia was that they got a place in the corner, so they didn't have to fear attacks from behind. At first, Saul decided they need to force the killers to show their hidden weapons, but Moon Hwan thought differently. Suddenly rising from the table, Moon Hwan ordered Saul to step back and not interfere, saying he could handle it himself. Saul barely had time to blink when Moon Hwan swiftly rushed to the center of the hall and immediately drew the attention of everyone present. The killers realized a hidden attack wouldn't work, so they decided to fight altogether. But Moon Hwan didn't give even the slightest pause in hand-to-hand combat. He scattered the first wave of attackers. Saul was stunned. Such strength without any weapons, only his own palms. It turns out Moon Hwan is a much greater master than he thought. And although the killers' plan failed, they were not going to retreat. Gathering strength, they attacked again. These pitiful efforts only caused a mocking smile to appear on Moon Hwan's face. He struck the floor with incredible force. The wooden boards couldn't withstand it. They cracked and broke under the weight of the attackers. At the same time, Saul quickly shielded Lady So with his body and asked her not to move more than 3 steps away from him. Finally dealing with the attackers, Moon Hwan demonstratively shook his hands. Approaching his table, Moon Hwan immediately asked if Suk was okay. Suk replied that she was fine, and it was thanks to the efforts of Teacher Ho. But Moon Hwan looked at everything skeptically. He did not believe Saul was capable of anything, so Suk shouldn't have praised him with pity. These words did not confuse Saul at all. On the contrary, he coldly reproached Moon Hwan for his carelessness. Moon Hwan was not going to tolerate such an attitude towards himself. How dare this brat speak to him so arrogantly? However, his gaze caught something else: the bodies of the killers scattered around and the table completely covered with weapons. Moon Hwan was sure that Saul was just an ordinary kid, but it seemed he did have some skills after all. Hesitating a little, Moon Hwan still decided it was time to return to the mansion. But Saul immediately objected. Returning to Dan's mansion was dangerous. The killers could very well be heading there and set up an ambush. So he suggested hiding in a crowded place until they figured out who was behind the assassination attempt. Instead, Moon Hwan just smiled and loudly declared that even if the attackers were 10 times more numerous, he would still easily deal with them. Of course, Saul never doubted his strength for a moment, but today he had to accompany the young lady Suk. But still, Moon Hwan was sure there was no reason to worry today. He had just lost vigilance a little. Then Saul suggested at least changing their appearance, but Moon Hwan irritably brushed off that idea as well. Of course, Saul understood people like Moon Hwan could not be convinced by words, so Saul really had no other choice but to follow him. Obviously, as soon as they entered the mansion, Sokuk would be in danger, but for Saul, who craved battle, this was good news. The travelers reached Dan's mansion without much difficulty and without delay entered its grounds. As soon as they walked along the path directly to the building, assassins jumped out at them from the bushes. Leaping forward sharply, Moon Hwan quickly dealt with the attackers and was already about to scold Saul for excessive caution. But that was not all. A huge avalanche of hired killers rushed at them, pressing them from both sides. Saul instantly assessed the situation and thought, how important must Lady So be if the clients involved so many assassins? Moon Hwan was in a furious rage. No matter how much he cut down, the assassins seemed endless. There were too many attackers, 3 to 4 times more than in the restaurant, and the opponents were not ordinary assassins. This made Moon Hwan squint. The opponents turned out to be martial arts masters with swordsmanship skills, so why did they attack them? Despite the incredible strength of Moon Hwan, one of the enemies still managed to break through the formation. Moon Hwan was already about to order Suk to run, but Saul confidently and quickly finished off the opponent, not letting him reach the goal. Of course, Saul was sure, no matter how strong Moon Hwan was, as long as he protected Suk, he would not be able to use his inner energy properly. Moon Hwan blocked another strike, paused only for a moment to catch his breath, but the assassins did not even think of giving him any pause. Clenching his teeth in anger, Moon Hwan frantically considered options. He could defeat them all one by one, but fighting and guarding Suk at the same time was too difficult a task. So Moon Hwan ordered Saul to grab Suk and run. He would handle it himself here. But Saul immediately objected. The enemy forces had probably already surrounded them from all sides, so instead of splitting up the squads, it was better to stay and wait. In about 2 hours, masters were supposed to arrive as reinforcements. They just had to hold out. This time it was not an order but a request. Moon Hwan wanted Saul to fulfill his wish. Suk tried to object. How could she just leave her comrade like that? Then Saul, apologizing, handed Sul the sword and quickly lifted her into his arms. With one powerful touch of his palm, Moon Hwan cleared a path for them, and Saul immediately rushed into the gap created. Some of the killers noticed that maneuver and almost immediately rushed in pursuit. But Saul didn't need any fight. Then the main thing required was speed. In the blink of an eye, Saul covered the distance and found himself outside the estate, and to his surprise, there were even more people there. The doors of the bookstore slammed open, and to the surprise of Mon and Van, Saul flew inside carrying Suk in his arms. Quickly setting Suk on his feet, Saul only stated that he urgently needed to enter the secret room for a moment. He didn't even let Mon and Van speak. Saul took Mrs. Suk by the hand and led her to the secret hideout in the inner room. As soon as they went inside, Saul ordered Mrs. So to stay here. Mon and Van burst into the secret room demanding explanations. Saul said the killers hunting Suk had already surrounded the bookstore. So Mon and Van needed to go outside and deal with all the opponents heading here. Because their lives depended on completing this task, Saul expected from them a desperate, ruthless fight. These words stirred smiles on the faces of Mon and Van. Immediately, without hesitation, they armed themselves. It had been a long time since they had risked their lives. Remembering decency, Mon and Van immediately gave their proper names and no longer hoped that Mrs. Suk might know anything about them. To the surprise of those present, Suk was well informed about the twin demons of the Gon clan. Of course, Saul had also heard about the twin demons, about the strong warriors who once held high positions. They were punished for accidentally killing a spy of the demonic palace who pretended to be an orthodox warrior. For this sin, they were assigned to serve in Yohan. Waving goodbye, Mon and Wang quickly fled the room. Anticipation of the upcoming battle blazed in their eyes. And Saul said it was time to leave, so he asked Suk to stay in the room and not to go out until he himself opened the door. Hesitating, Suk shared her fears. This place could soon become her grave. But Saul was determined to do everything so that the young lady would not die. Smiling, Suk wanted to tell Saul something else. In fact, her surname was Dan and her real name was Suk Dan. Suk Dan is a precious gem in the hands of the commander of the demonic palace's warriors. A miserable child who could not master martial arts due to a heavenly ailment, deep disruption of the yin meridians. But even despite this, thanks to her unique intellect, the Council of Elders had already appointed her as the next chief strategist of the demonic palace. Now Saul understood why so many assassins targeted Suk. She was simply drawn into the tangled political intrigues at the palace. Despite the fact that Suk was the daughter of an army commander, she still stubbornly wanted to know Saul's real name. To which Saul replied, "I will name it once everything is over." Having left the secret room, Saul had no idea why a noblewoman like Suk needed to know the name of an ordinary operative from the squad. Closing the door, Saul destroyed the mechanism that opened the secret room. As Saul had assumed, the killers appeared quite quickly. It turns out even the twin demons could not stop them. Unexpectedly, a voice came from behind the closed door with a proposal. Saul just needed to step aside and not resist. And Saul perfectly understood. A killer opens his mouth only when he cannot guarantee victory. So the negotiations failed. A fight would still have to happen. The killers broke down the door and rushed into the attack. A fierce battle broke out, and after a few minutes only Saul was still standing. Nearby lay the bodies of the defeated enemies. Saul had already decided that he had finally killed them all, but behind the doorframe he sensed one more opponent. There was no point in hiding any longer. The opponent came into the light, and he was struck that Saul was able to sense his presence. Yet the killer was extremely disappointed by Saul's appearance. If only he had known in advance, he would definitely have changed the plan. And then Saul thought he had joined the rescue squad 6 months ago. Could it be that the plan to kill Dan Suk had been developed even longer? Yet the opponent had no intention to fight. He again offered Saul to retreat and save his life. And he added slyly that he made such an offer not at all because he was unsure of his victory, and Saul was perfectly aware of this. Much more conveniently intercepting the sword, Saul replied that from this moment the opponent would not take a single step forward. He heard something click and change in the stranger's aura, and the latter immediately noted. For an ordinary killer, Saul's internal energy was even quite good. Then the unknown assassin, as if out of mercy, decided to give Saul the right of the first move. The unusual stance with the sword and the words about the first and second move in such a situation made Saul chill with the thought. This man, it seemed, was not a killer at all. So why then would someone who is not a killer interfere in a fight? Saul waved off the thoughts and rushed into attack, using the beast's path. Suddenly, a colossal flow of internal energy crashed down on Saul like a tsunami from within. Saul himself felt the weight of the opponent's sword. It was enough to clash with a normal strike and his blade would instantly shatter. I immediately realized a direct clash was impossible. Saul managed at the last moment to parry the enemy's strike. The killer was struck by the unusual technique with which Saul deflected the blow. But her surprise only confirmed one thing: Saul lacked skill, so blocking had to be done correctly. Suddenly lunging forward, the killer began to unleash a continuous hail of blows on Saul, not giving a second to rest. All that remained was to parry and reflect the strikes, then retreat. Fortunately, the opponent did not know that Saul could wield a heavy sword. So Saul only had to wait until the enemy got carried away by his advantage and launched a powerful attack himself. Finally, the stranger stopped the barrage of attacks and Saul got a minute of rest for the first time. This was exactly the chance he was counting on. Of course, the stranger understood. All of Saul's maneuvers were just a trick to buy time. Gathering all his strength, the killer wanted to see how Saul would handle his powerful attack and rushed forward. He snatched the sword from the body of the fallen enemy, and Saul applied the principle of the technique of the divided mind. With one hand, he delivered the supreme strike of Chomper, and with the other he struck a powerful lunge until the force of the collision scattered the opponents in different directions. The stranger, who remained standing, was amazed. It turned out Saul could cut with a heavy sword and was simply waiting for the right moment. If during the attack the stranger had not enhanced his heavy sword, he would definitely have died. Such a dangerous opponent as Saul he had no right to leave alive. The stranger was already ready to attack the unarmed Saul, but suddenly felt an unusual energy. Moon Hwan was approaching them, and unlike Saul, he was an opponent who did not promise the stranger any easy victory. So, understanding that it was impossible to deal with Moon Hwan now, the stranger decided to retreat. He left and threw out a phrase that Saul was incredibly lucky this time, and during the next meeting the stranger would definitely kill him. As soon as the opponent disappeared, Saul collapsed to the floor without strength, as if all his power had been released along with the air. To release so much power from just an open stance, does it mean the stranger was hiding his true strength? Suddenly, as soon as Saul got out of the secret room, Lady Suk ran up to him. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Suk was so wildly worried about Saul that she simply ignored his order to stay in the room. To Suk's surprise, Saul said his full name because that was exactly what he promised when everything finally ended.